Celtic society was built around a powerful social unit known as the clan. In many regions, this community was called a Tuath, a group formed by families who shared ancestry, alliances, and mutual responsibilities. A single clan might consist of several related family groups that all trace their origins back to a common forebear. Authority inside these families did not simply pass to the eldest man. Instead, leadership emerged within extended kin groups. Each family was guided by a recognized head who acted as the pillar of the household. This person carried responsibility for the family's obligations, including debts, the welfare of unmarried women, and negotiations with local rulers or powerful neighbours. The head of a family also served as the representative of that household in dealings with the wider clan and the political world beyond it. Leadership within a clan followed a distinctive process. Those who could claim descent from important ancestors within a few generations were eligible to take part in selecting a leader. From among these qualified individuals, a ruler might be chosen through agreement or voting among the kin groups. The chosen leader could be known by different titles depending on the status of the community. Some were called kings, others chieftains, lords, or captains. The exact title often reflected how powerful the clan was, and how it interacted with neighbouring clans or emerging kingdoms. Hierarchy shaped every level of Celtic life, but power was never entirely one-sided. A chieftain exercised authority over followers, yet the relationship involved clear duties in both directions. Leaders were expected to protect the people who served them. They were responsible for providing security, food, and shelter to those who depended on their protection. The weak, the injured, and the vulnerable were not meant to be abandoned. In return, ordinary members of the clan contributed their labour. They tended herds belonging to wealthier families, worked the land, and carried out a wide range of tasks that supported the prosperity of the community. Some clans grew large enough to attract smaller allied groups. These lesser communities remained separate in identity, but were connected through obligations of loyalty and cooperation. They might share resources, offer military support, or rely on the protection of a stronger ally. Such networks formed broader alliances that could stretch across entire regions. Social rank was not completely fixed. According to traditional legal customs known as Brehon law, families could gradually improve their position over time. A free person of modest standing might eventually rise to noble status, though such changes could not occur overnight. The law required that a new social position be maintained across several generations before it was fully recognized. Land ownership followed a similar principle. Land was not treated as the property of individuals, but as a possession of the family group. Legal disputes, therefore, distinguished carefully between the rights of a person and the rights of the family to which they belonged. Among the most powerful clans, rulers began to gather courts around themselves. These courts included foster children raised in noble households, advisors, influential families, and individuals seeking opportunity close to power. Many of these courts travelled with the ruler rather than remaining fixed in one place. Wherever the ruler went, legal experts travelled with the court as well. These officials specialised in interpreting the traditional legal customs and settling disputes among the people. Celtic communities occupied a wide geographical world stretching across the islands to the northwest of Europe and parts of the nearby mainland. Despite this large territory, most people lived very local lives. Villages were small and rural, and individuals often spent their entire lives within a day's journey of their birthplace. Large cities were rare. Political authority was usually scattered among many small rulers, rather than concentrated in a single centralized state. Celtic settlements often clustered around defensive structures. Homes were typically circular in shape and arranged near fortified locations. Some communities relied on natural defences such as islands within lakes, while others constructed strongholds on hilltops. These hill forts served as places of refuge during conflict. When raiders or rival groups threatened the countryside, villagers could withdraw behind their protective walls. Hill forts also functioned as traditional centres of authority. Chieftains and religious leaders used them as places of gathering, decision-making, and ceremony. Their design took advantage of the surrounding landscape, combining steep slopes with man-made barriers such as ditches, ramparts, and wooden walls. Unlike later stone fortresses, these structures relied largely on earthworks reinforced with timber. During times of growing tension, many ancient fortifications were repaired or expanded in preparation for future warfare. Clothing reflected both practicality and identity. Most people wore a long linen tunic, known as a lane, along with a cloak fastened around the shoulders. The cloak, often made of wool or animal hide, could be wrapped several times around the body to provide warmth and limited protection against blows. Tunics were worn with belts that allowed the garment to be gathered for easier movement during travel or labour. The precise length of a tunic carried social meaning. Wearing one that extended too far above or below the knee could invite ridicule and suggest poverty. In certain communities, clothing that failed to cover the body properly was considered improper behaviour. Although wealthy individuals wore garments made from finer materials and brighter colours, the overall style of dress remained similar across social classes. Jewellery held particular importance. Rings, bracelets, and armlets were valued objects, but one ornament stood above the rest in cultural significance. This was the torque, a rigid metal neck ring that symbolized power and status. Torques were crafted from metals such as bronze, silver, or gold. Influential leaders often wore elaborate versions around their necks, while rulers sometimes rewarded loyal followers by presenting them with torques as signs of honour and authority. Both men and women could receive these gifts, and their complexity often reflected the prestige of the wearer. Economic life depended largely on barter rather than coinage. Trade between villages usually involved the exchange of goods and services rather than standardized currency. Value was often measured using a traditional unit that represented half the worth of a milk cow. Most communities focused on producing what they needed to survive, occasionally trading surplus goods with neighbouring settlements. Such exchanges were frequently organised through clan leaders who maintained long-term relationships with allied communities. Drinking formed an important part of hospitality and celebration. Celtic communities were known for enjoying a wide range of alcoholic beverages. In earlier times, imported wines and strong drinks arrived through long-distance trade. When these trade routes became unreliable, people turned to local ingredients instead. Grains and other available resources were fermented to produce whatever drink could be made. Offering alcohol to guests remained an essential gesture of welcome. Another important custom was fostering. Children from one family were often raised for long periods in the household of another. This practice strengthened bonds within extended kin networks and allowed knowledge to pass between families. Fosterage followed detailed agreements specifying the duration of the arrangement, the responsibilities of both households, and the training the child would receive. A child might spend many years learning a craft, a trade, or even religious knowledge under the guidance of a foster parent. The connection formed through fostering was considered sacred and lifelong. If foster parents later became unable to work because of age or illness, the foster child was expected to support them just as a natural son or daughter would. In this way, fostering created networks of loyalty that stretched across generations. Marriage also followed distinctive traditions. Unions between social equals were common and involved negotiation between families regarding property and future wealth. Unlike many societies of the time, women often retained control of their own property after marriage. Divorce was permitted, though it required careful agreements to divide shared assets. Other forms of union existed as well. A man might maintain relationships with additional partners, whose status differed from that of a primary wife. Such arrangements were recognized within traditional law even when outside religious authorities objected to them. In rarer cases, a woman could be taken by force as a spouse, though this practice was widely condemned and often led to conflict between families. Attitudes toward death combined solemn ritual with communal memory. Burial was the most common method of laying the dead to rest. In earlier traditions, graves sometimes took the form of large earthen mounds or stone passage tombs. In crowded settlements, cremation might be used, after which the ashes were placed in urns and buried. The dead were often interred alongside personal possessions. In the graves of powerful individuals, servants or animals might also be sacrificed, so they could accompany their master in the next world. Mourning rituals could last for days or even weeks. During this time, friends and relatives gathered in the home of the deceased. Stories of the person's life were told, songs and poems were recited, and both sorrow and laughter filled the gatherings. Remembering every moment of a person's life was considered a final act of respect. The legal traditions governing Celtic society were flexible rather than rigid. Instead of a single written code, the law consisted of principles passed down through generations. Judges interpreted these principles according to the circumstances of each case. Because the rules were broad and adaptable, decisions often varied, depending on the region and the authority of the judge. Disputes were usually treated as private matters between families rather than public crimes against the state. Even serious offences were often resolved through compensation rather than execution. A person responsible for killing another might be required to pay a heavy fine that compensated the victim's family, both for the loss of life and for the damage to their honour. Systems of guarantors ensured that these obligations were fulfilled. The authority to interpret these laws belonged to learned judges who travelled between communities, resolving conflicts. These individuals commanded great respect because they carried the knowledge required to apply the traditions of the law. Their role demanded years of study and training under experienced mentors. Stories from the Celtic world often blur the lines between poet, historian, singer, prophet, and priest. In older tales, a single figure might carry the skills of a trained poet, the memory of an archivist, the voice of a performer, and the reputation of someone who can touch the unseen. In practice, those callings did not cancel each other out. A person could learn several traditions at once, borrow from each, and move between roles when life demanded it. Even so, communities tended to expect different things from different kinds of poets, and those expectations shaped who was trusted, who was feared, and who was paid. In earlier centuries, the bard was far more than entertainment. A bard was a living record office. Families relied on them to keep names, deeds, promises, and disputes alive in a world where memory carried legal weight. When judges needed context, who owed what, which alliance had been sworn, where a boundary truly lay, poets could supply the remembered details that turned a quarrel into a ruling. People described them as thinkers as much as performers, and many believed their speech carried a force that reached beyond ordinary persuasion. Some said a bard's words could bless a household with honour. Others feared the opposite, that sharp language could ruin reputations, split loyalties, and weaken a ruler's hold on his followers. That fear was not just superstition. Reputation was power, and poets shaped reputation. A chief who wanted to stabilize a hungry season, secure supplies, or calm restless allies might pressure his poet to make it happen through influence and message. The bard, however, wasn't meant to be treated like a servant. Payment mattered, and it mattered on time. A neglected poet could answer with mockery, rumour, and cutting verse designed to sting in every hall where it was repeated. In a culture where status travelled by story, satire was more than a joke. It was a weapon. Alongside the bard stood another tradition of poet, one associated less with flattering rulers, and more with teaching the wider community. Where court poets often lived close to nobles, this other kind of poet was expected to speak for shared values, old customs, and social memory that belonged to everyone. Their verses carried lessons. How honour worked, why oaths mattered, what happened when a family ignored its duties, and how a community kept balance without collapsing into endless revenge. In older times, that teaching role was closely linked to the religious and learned classes. As those older institutions were pushed out of many regions, the poets who carried their style remained, but fewer openly claimed deep training in the older sacred traditions. The voice survived, even when the lineage behind it became harder to prove. Across the sea, northern storytellers filled a similar niche. The Norse had their own hall poets, trained to recite lineages, celebrate victories, and carry news from distant coasts. In difficult times, even communities that distrusted one another made room for travelling poets because information was scarce and the world felt larger and more dangerous with every season. A story heard through a hostile lens could still contain useful truth. The name of a new war leader, the fall of a trading route, the arrival of raiders, the price of grain, the mood of a rival king. In cold winters and dim weather, people also wanted comfort, and a skilled performer could make a crowded hall feel warmer for a night. Still, patronage came with a cost. Poets who travelled from court to court lived on the road, and the road was no longer forgiving. Travel meant wolves, bandits, feuds, and sudden violence. It also meant changing loyalties. A poet might praise one ruler this month and dine with his enemy the next, not out of betrayal, but out of survival. Some poets aligned themselves with the dominant faith of the region and performed under religious protection when it was offered. Others kept to older beliefs or simply avoided open declarations in order to pass safely through contested lands. In an age where every journey could end in theft or blood, affiliation was often a practical decision rather than a pure one. As conditions worsened and threats grew, many rulers gathered poets into their households more deliberately than before. The old image of the feared poet whose verses could sway policy began to fade. In many places, keeping a poet in one's hall became a sign of wealth rather than a sign of vulnerability. A ruler who could feed an extra mouth year-round, pay for fine clothing, and host performances on demand was signalling resources to rivals and followers alike. For poets, a permanent place in a court offered something rare: regular meals, a safer roof, and a steady stream of gifts. In harsh times, that stability was tempting, and many accepted it. But the job changed when the roof became permanent. The poet who once guarded memory could become a specialist in praise. Older stories were polished to place the current ruler in the best light. Ancestry was presented with extra confidence, sometimes stretched until it fit a political need. Claims to land could be made to sound ancient even when they were recent. News became a tool and storytelling became strategy. The poet still entertained and still informed, but the search for truth was often pushed aside in favour of usefulness. In many halls, the poet was expected to build a narrative that helped the household win allies, intimidate rivals, and justify decisions already made. Even so, the wider world did not stop gathering. The great seasonal festivals and public assemblies remained some of the few moments when rival groups could lower their weapons long enough to eat, trade, argue, and plan. Celtic culture carried a strange tension. People could accept that every retelling of a story changed details, yet they also insisted that the core meaning stayed intact. Festivals reflected that same mindset. They were both adaptable and stubborn, reshaped by new beliefs, but rarely erased. 4 major seasonal celebrations anchored the old calendar. They marked turning points in the year and were tied to the rhythms of farming, herding, and household survival. These dates were also treated as moments when the human world felt closer to the unseen. In regions that had adopted the newer faith, the same calendar moments often survived under different explanations. The names changed, the language of devotion shifted, but the gathering itself remained because people still needed structure, shared time, and communal reassurance. The first great turning point came as the harvest ended and winter tightened its grip. This was the season people described as the start of the darker half of the year, when nights lengthened and fear travelled easily. Many believed the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin. Ancestors were remembered more intensely, and the risk of wandering spirits and hostile forces was treated as real. Families prepared feasts, checked their stores, counted livestock, and made offerings meant to secure protection through the hard months. Children were sometimes dressed in disguises, not as play, but as a form of shielding, an attempt to confuse anything that might be hunting for the vulnerable. Games and contests broke the tension, but the mood remained serious beneath the noise. Winter was coming, and winter decided who lived. At the centre of this autumn season, one gathering in Ireland carried particular political weight in memory. It was remembered as a long event measured in weeks rather than days. A place where kingship was affirmed, alliances were performed publicly, and the idea of a single high ruler was acted out through ceremony. The old story cast the land itself as a partner in rulership, as if sovereignty were a bond that had to be renewed, not merely inherited. Over time, that institution weakened and then ended, and later generations spoke of the last fully recognised High King as a dividing line between an older order and the fractured reality that followed. The title remained, but more as a symbol than a functioning command. In the present age, that symbolism has become dangerous again. Some groups want to revive the old centre of power, arguing that the newer faith failed to protect the land during catastrophe and invasion. Others resist fiercely, remembering that earlier conflicts over religion and authority ended in destruction and bloodshed. The place itself has become a battlefield in the mind. To some, it represents unity and renewal. To others, it represents a curse and a warning. The argument is not only about belief, it is about who has the right to speak for the whole island and whether the Celtic world should be drawn under one banner or left to its separate crowns and clans. As winter finally began to loosen, another festival arrived to announce the first promise of spring. It was associated with protection, healing, and the return of life after cold. In some regions, a small figure representing the season's power was carried from house to house, greeted with food and hospitality in exchange for blessings and glimpses of what might come. Water played a central role. People visited wells and sacred springs, leaving gifts and carrying home a small amount of water to bless hearth and household. What is striking is how easily this practice crossed religious lines. Different communities explained the source of the blessing differently, but the act remained almost identical. Seek living water, honour it, bring its protection home. When the year turned toward brightness, the festival of fire arrived. Bonfires marked the shift from the last shadows of winter into the working season. Herds were prepared for pasture. Offerings were left at places believed to be watched by local spirits, meant to secure peace between the human community and forces that could help or harm it. The message of the festival was clear. The land might be harsh, but it was not empty. It had powers, seen and unseen, and ignoring them invited trouble. Fire was used as a barrier and a signal, both a celebration and a warning to whatever might be listening. This same season also carried an administrative gathering tied to law and governance. Elites met at a hill that tradition treated as the symbolic centre of the island. The purpose was not celebration alone. Laws were reviewed, changes were proposed, and leaders compared what had worked against what had failed. In theory, it was an act of order-making, a moment to pretend the world was stable enough to be governed by careful debate rather than emergency. Later in the summer came the festival associated with skill, competition, and social bonding. Athletic contests and feasting filled the days, and matchmaking was treated as a serious business, not just romance, but alliance building. A related public assembly was remembered for something rare: openness. It was described as a gathering where status mattered less than it usually did, where law was spoken aloud in front of everyone, and where changes were explained so that even ordinary people could understand what rules now governed their lives. In a world where power often hid behind private agreements, the idea of law read publicly carried enormous weight. And yet the seasons themselves had begun to fail. The calendar still pointed to spring and summer, but the land did not answer. Cold fog, dim light, and unsteady weather turned the entire year into a single long twilight. Crops struggled. Warmth did not fully return. Even when people gathered at the proper dates, the surrounding world refused to match the celebration. This created a new kind of desperation. Those who held to older rites clung to the festivals as a way to keep life from sliding into chaos. Repeating the old pattern was a form of resistance, a refusal to admit that nature's order had broken. It was also an attempt to win favour from any power that might restore balance, because when ordinary solutions fail, people look for extraordinary ones. Communities shaped by the newer faith often pushed in the opposite direction. Some tried to suppress seasonal rites entirely, fearing they invited dangerous influences or undermined religious authority. Others allowed reduced versions, stripped of older meanings and refitted to acceptable forms. Across the Isles, the result was not unity, but variation. Different villages marking the same dates with different prayers, different fears, and different justifications. Daily survival changed under these conditions. Goods once treated as ordinary became treasures: torches, smoked food, dried grain, alcohol, horses, and fur. Luxury items lost their importance because perfume couldn't warm a house and dye could not feed a child. The world grew sharper-edged. For some, it became the perfect time to sell violence as a service. Mercenaries found work wherever small communities could no longer defend themselves. Outlaws multiplied in places where law weakened and hunger grew stronger than loyalty. Even travel within familiar terrain became risky. The landscape itself turned deceptive. Bogs that should have frozen solid remained unpredictable, hiding patches of brackish water beneath thin skins of ice. A careless step could pull a person down with no warning. Water, always treated as a threshold to other forces in local belief, became even more frightening. What looked like a safe pond could be a trap. What looked like a friendly fire in the distance could be bait for thieves. Under a sky that rarely brightened, the difference between refuge and ambush grew harder to see. There is a small island set near the heart of the Celtic world that people still talk about with a tight voice. Long ago, it was associated with sacred groves and the learned keepers of the old faith. Later, it fell into Viking hands, and that loss became more than a military defeat. For many communities, it was a symbol of a wider collapse, the moment when an older spiritual order began to slip out of public life. For centuries afterward, the influence of the Druids faded in slow stages until only traces remained in isolated valleys and stubborn families. And then, in the age of unending cold and dim skies, the direction began to change again. In the imagination of Celtic society, Druids were never simply another branch of authority. They were set apart from ordinary politics and yet placed above it. Old stories describe councils where everyone kept silent until the king spoke, and even the king waited until the druid permitted the conversation to begin. Some legends go further and claim a ruler could be held by a binding taboo, unable to speak at all until his personal druid asked the right question and released him. Whether taken literally or as a way of describing real social pressure, the message is clear. The druid's voice carried a kind of priority that even kings could not easily ignore. In those same tales, a single sentence could halt a feud, and a simple gesture could settle the question of who was fit to rule. That reputation belongs to an earlier era. For many generations, most rulers no longer treated Druidic instruction as law. The old image of the druid who could redirect armies with a word survived mostly in songs and fireside recollections. The decline did not happen because the druids forgot how to speak. It happened because a rival spiritual system expanded across the Celtic kingdoms and steadily pushed the old order out of the centre of life. Missionaries spread a new faith with relentless energy, and the most famous among them became the face of that movement in popular memory. The struggle was not polite. Communities fractured, sacred places changed hands, and the conflict at times turned openly violent. There were raids, purges, and brutal confrontations that were remembered for generations. In response, a tradition that had always guarded its knowledge behind layers of secrecy withdrew even deeper into shadow. By the time the long twilight settled over the lands, many people treated the remaining druids as relics. They were seen as aging figures muttering about an order that had already died. A few still carried influence in particular districts, especially where old families protected them. But the larger structure that once trained, organised, and projected authority across the Celtic world was mostly gone. Some teachings survived only in fragments. Other parts vanished entirely, lost with the people who carried them. Then the world changed in a way that made forgotten skills valuable again. When the days grew darker, the seasons failed, and fear became a constant background noise, ordinary people began to look for guidance that felt older than the crisis. Predictions, omens, and practical wisdom suddenly mattered more than public debate. In that climate, the Druids claimed to read patterns in nature and to speak with confidence about unseen forces regained weight. It did not restore the past overnight, but it created space for a return. Years spent hiding had not been wasted. In secrecy, new students had been trained not with the tired caution of survivors, but with the sharp intensity of believers who felt history swinging back in their direction. A new generation emerged ready to defend the old ways, not only as a religion, but as a political force. Despite the singular label people use for them, Druids were never a single uniform group. The word covered many roles. Some were keepers of ritual and seasonal observance. Some specialised in story and verse. Others acted as judges or interpreters of customary law. Some protected woodlands, sacred wells, or ancient sites whose importance was not always visible to outsiders. Some moved from place to place with no stable patron, living as wanderers who depended on hospitality and fear. There were also sects that kept their own internal identities and priorities, including women's circles devoted to war and prophecy, whose practices could differ sharply from those of other Druidic groups. In some regions, these branches cooperated. In others, they barely acknowledged one another, sharing only the belief that the land and the unseen world were not separate from daily life. Becoming a druid was not always inherited, even if a few isolated communities treated it as a family role. More commonly, selection was controlled by druids themselves. Older members or councils chose candidates and brought them into training. In theory, background did not decide eligibility. Men and women could be chosen. Wealth could help a student endure years of study, but it did not guarantee acceptance. The criteria were kept deliberately private, yet intelligence, endurance, and the ability to remember enormous quantities of material were clearly essential. At the centre of training stood memory. Druidic knowledge was preserved through oral tradition so demanding that it shaped the student's entire life. A trainee was expected to carry a vast library in the mind, learned so precisely that the stories could be repeated without error. These narratives were not just entertainment. Each tale was designed to do several things at once. It preserved the memory of events and lineages. It carried standards for behaviour, duty, and justice. It also reinforced proper relationships with the divine and with the powers believed to inhabit the landscape. To an untrained listener, a story might sound like a heroic tale. To the trained ear, it contained rules, boundaries, warnings, and instructions layered into the structure. Because this knowledge was not meant to sit in books, teaching took place in controlled settings. In older times, some schools were said to be aligned with the sky, built so that the sun's movement on key days of the year matched the architecture. As persecution grew, training shifted into places less visible and more defensible. Hidden groves, caves, remote valleys, and secluded clearings. The education was not purely mystical. It included counting, measurement, and careful observation of nature's cycles. It also included hard lessons about human behaviour, how pride turns into violence, how hunger changes loyalty, how fear makes people accept cruelty as necessity. Those insights were taught through stories, because stories were the safest container for dangerous truths. To join the Druidic path was not a single transformation but a lifelong discipline. Learning did not end with initiation. Druids refined their practices continually and tested one another's interpretations. They sometimes taught fragments of their knowledge to outsiders who showed promise, especially future leaders who needed broader understanding of law, diplomacy, or the psychology of conflict. Many rulers and war leaders, according to tradition, received this kind of instruction, not as a conversion but as preparation for the pressures of command. The duties a druid could perform covered nearly every category of authority except direct rule. They were the learned specialists of the Celtic world, consulted on matters of belief and ceremony, but also on medicine, remedies, and the management of disputes. They were treated as people who could interpret signs, negotiate with forces beyond the human realm, and offer counsel that did not come from self-interest. The ideal was that druids should not chase wealth. Communities were expected to keep them fed and sheltered, but not to make them rich. Poverty was not romanticized, yet the avoidance of luxury was meant to keep them focused on responsibilities that were supposed to serve the land rather than a household. In that sense, druids functioned as connective tissue. Celtic kingdoms differed in politics, dialect, and alliances, but many shared assumptions about the world that druids helped maintain. Even rulers outside Ireland were remembered as respecting druidic counsel, praising them as wise advisors. In the oldest stories, their authority could override decisions that would otherwise stand. They could stop an escalation if they judged it improper. They could command a task for the sake of communal welfare. They could even challenge legal outcomes by appealing to a higher framework of order that was believed to exist beyond ordinary power. Seasonal rites were part of that framework. 4 major turning points in the year were treated as periods when the normal rules bent. These were not simply holidays, they were liminal days, seen as moments when the boundary between worlds shifted. Social rules loosened, ordinary oaths were treated differently, and a controlled chaos was expected. In those moments, Druids were meant to manage the instability, guiding ceremonies, preventing disputes from turning into bloodshed, and keeping the community's attention fixed on ritual obligations rather than personal feuds. With the Druids rising again, many of these responsibilities have returned to them in practice, even if not in the same form as before. They appear again as teachers, legal arbiters, poets, and intermediaries with unseen powers. Yet the modern revival is also marked by 2 practical goals that shape almost everything they do. One is spiritual, reclaiming influence from the dominant church and persuading the frightened population that the old rites still hold power. The other is strategic, a quiet campaign of preparation that looks, from the outside, like a slow-building war effort. The aim is not only survival, it is restoration of prestige, of territory, and of the world order they believe was stolen from them. Alongside their public roles, Druidic ritual is surrounded by fear because it is described as rooted in 2 ideas. One is the belief that the world runs on patterns, cycles of sky, sun, moon, and season that can be read and used by those with enough training. The other is the belief that physical life carries force, and that force can be redirected through sacrifice and symbolic acts. Druids are portrayed as planners who think in decades, sometimes in lifetimes, mapping actions to celestial timing and geography. Their sacred sites, where they still control them, are chosen with a careful understanding of landscape and sky. But the tradition is also remembered for cruelty. Some accounts describe rites that rely on blood and death, claiming that consuming a victim's life force grants power or insight. Others speak of defensive barriers made from human remains, or grotesque displays meant to terrify enemies and impress the unseen. These images are part of why outsiders fear Druidic places at night. A person who stumbles into a ritual clearing in such stories does not find gentle prayer. They find something designed to shake the soul. It is important, however, that even within the tradition, not every group follows the same extremes. After centuries of persecution, many Druids in the current era are described as more cautious in public. They rely more often on substitutes, on symbolic equivalents, and on ritual metaphors that achieve part of the effect without provoking immediate rebellion from communities divided between old faith and new. Where the most brutal versions of ritual require human remains, a substitute might be crafted to imitate what is needed. Such replacements are said to be weaker, but they allow the Druids to operate in places where open violence would turn an entire village against them. It also allows them to present themselves as protectors, rather than predators, at least until their position is secure. Even so, the direction of the age invites darker choices. In earlier centuries, some people were willing to die for the gods as a point of honor. That willingness declined as religious authority shifted. Under the pressure of endless twilight, scarcity, and invasion, old ideas about sacrifice can rise again, not because people become crueler, but because desperation makes extreme solutions feel reasonable. The greatest focus of the renewed Druidic movement is tied to a promised land spoken of in Celtic myth, a realm of youth, abundance, and timeless strength. In older belief, it was not merely an afterlife, but a real place connected to the world through hidden crossings. The Druids are portrayed as the ones who reignited a conflict over access to that realm, a struggle that spreads across the Celtic kingdoms, but centres especially on Ireland. Foreign attacks and environmental collapse created panic, and panic made the old prophecies sound less like folklore and more like warning. That gave the Druids both an opportunity and a burden. If they claimed to understand the crisis, people began to demand that they fix it. Their solution, as it is whispered, is breathtaking and terrifying. The aim is described as bringing Ireland closer to the otherworld, creating an overlap, opening a permanent crossing, or even replacing one land with another. Outsiders argue over what this means. Some imagine a literal shifting of the island itself. Others believe it means drawing an unseen realm into the physical landscape. No one outside the inner circles claims certainty, and uncertainty breeds fear. If a promised land merges with the mortal world, what happens to the living? Is it salvation, or a mass death dressed up as renewal? Is the true plan to open gateways and unleash a hidden army trained beyond human time to defend the Celtic kingdoms? Different rumours carry different horrors, and the Druids are not in the habit of correcting them. What can be seen, however, is the campaign around sacred sites. Many ancient places were taken over the centuries and transformed into churches and monasteries. Now, those sites become battlegrounds again, seized and reclaimed in waves. Some Druids insist the opposing faith understands their project and is actively trying to block it by holding the most important locations. Others dismiss that claim as paranoia. In practice, the result is the same. Control of holy ground becomes a strategic necessity. The most critical locations are the royal ceremonial sites of Ireland, remembered as places where kingship, law, and the land's spirit were once bound together. The renewed plan depends on lighting great fires at these places in coordinated timing, mirrored by fires across many other sacred locations. Offerings are made. Rites are performed. The entire effort is framed not as a local rebellion but as a continent-scale working. The kind of ritual that demands unity, discipline, and unwavering belief. Some claim it is not even truly a human project, but something driven by ancient powers that have been moving pieces into place for centuries. Tied closely to this is the relationship between Druids and the beings collectively called the Fae. In Irish tradition, the unseen world is crowded with courts, tribes, and solitary creatures. Some are described as noble and generous, others as predatory and cruel, many as both depending on how they are approached. The Druids are portrayed as custodians of a faith that treats these beings not as children's stories, but as neighbours whose favour must be negotiated. Ritual etiquette matters. Offerings matter. Boundaries matter. When the proper rites are observed, people believe the Fae can protect a household, guide a traveller, or bless a harvest. When they are ignored or insulted, the same forces can destroy livestock, twist luck, and lure the unwary into ruin. In the Celtic lands, the line between legend and living memory is thin, and it is often crossed by figures who feel larger than any single clan or kingdom. Some are born from catastrophe and shaped by it. Others emerge from old stories that refuse to die, resurfacing whenever the world grows desperate enough to need them. In the age of raids, hunger, and bitter cold, these names move through the mouths of travellers like warnings and prayers, spoken in halls, whispered at hearths, and carried on the road as if the act of telling might summon protection. Éire stands apart from the other leaders tied to the hand of Dana, not because she seeks attention, but because her story begins where most people's stories end. She was born during the first wave of Viking terror, in a time when villages learned too quickly how fragile they were. Even as a child, she seemed to perceive layers of the world that others could not. Where most saw empty fields or a dark tree line, she sensed presences and patterns. The Fae did not feel like distant tales to her. They were familiar, close and constant, companions of her earliest years before becoming something more dangerous as she grew older. That childhood ended in a single night of violence. Norse raiders struck her home and erased it, leaving nothing behind that a child could cling to. Those she loved were killed or dragged away, and the world she understood collapsed into smoke and screams. In the chaos, the fair folk she had once treated as friends pulled her from the path of death. They did not simply hide her. They delivered her into the care of a power they called their mother, a presence older than fear and sharper than grief. The Morrigan took the child in, not as a charity, but as a claim. What followed was not healing in any gentle sense. Éire was carried into Tir na Nog and shaped by it. She trained there until the frightened girl vanished under years of discipline, hard lessons, and relentless transformation. She shed her birth name as if it belonged to someone who had died, and she emerged as Éire Carrog, the Silver Raven, the Crow Mother of this age. Those who have seen her describe a figure that looks almost unreal against winter light. Silver hair, pale skin, eyes like fresh blood, and a white feathered cloak that turns her into a moving omen. In her hand she carries a shillelagh, using it as a walking staff when she chooses calm and as a weapon when she does not. Éire was the first to cross back through the veil, and the fact that she still lived made the passage easier for her than for spirits bound to death. The land she returned to was a fractured place. Vikings had come again in strength, and the clans, instead of standing together, were tearing at each other over pride, old grudges and shrinking resources. That sight did not sadden her. It enraged her. She did not begin her work by addressing kings in public assemblies. She went where influence could spread quietly and quickly into households and networks that men in armour often underestimated. Her first major contact was the Queen of Tara, Gormfl Ingen Flan Sinna, a ruler known for sharp judgment and a will that did not soften for anyone. Éire chose her for a reason. This was not a sheltered woman waiting to be saved. She was experienced in the darker realities of power, capable of plotting, arranging deaths, surviving betrayal, and refusing submission, even to the church. Éire saw in her a mind built for the era that had arrived. From that starting point, she began assembling what she called her murder of crows, a growing circle of Bandrui, sworn into the Morrigan's service. Under that banner, even a woman with no title could become as feared as any queen, if the Morrigan favoured her. Now, the Silver Raven's appearance carries a specific meaning, especially to the Northmen. She is not simply a rumour or a ghost story. She is treated as a signal that something worse is coming. Where she is seen, a coven is believed to follow, bringing curses, fear, and the kind of relentless pursuit that turns invaders into prey. Among Viking camps, her name is spoken as an ill sign that can sour morale before a blade is drawn. Not all names in the Celtic world belong to the living. Some belong to the idea of return, a promise threaded through centuries of storytelling. King Arthur is one of those names, carried as both history and prophecy. The legends place him in an age of turmoil, and they claim his deeds reached far beyond ordinary warfare. He is said to be the son of Uther and Igraine, brought into the world through the intervention of a wizard whose influence lingers across the myths. Much of Arthur's youth is hidden, as if the story itself protects that period with deliberate fog. By the time he stands fully formed in tradition, he is no longer a prince learning the world. He is a king battling monsters at the edges of human understanding. Boars that behave like demons, witches who twist the mind, dragons that burn the land, giants who make armies look small, and creatures so strange they sound like inventions until a traveller swears they saw tracks in snow. The question of Arthur's faith remains one of the oldest arguments in the islands. Some claim he kept loyalty to the ancient gods of his people. Others insist he eventually turned to the white god. What is consistent is the portrait of his court at its height. He is described as commanding more than 200 heroes, each one a figure in his own right, bound to him by loyalty and reputation. Arthur is remembered as a ruler who understood the weapon of narrative. He did not only fight, he terrified. Stories say he would speak of the deeds of his companions in front of enemies until courage drained out of them, leaving opponents unwilling to meet him in open battle. His authority is also described as reaching across much of Britain, with claims that even distant regions fell under his influence. One of the most striking episodes tied to Arthur is his journey into Anwn, an otherworld realm described as both treasure house and prison. In that venture, he went not merely for wealth, but to retrieve kinsmen who had been taken. He returned without the riches people expected, yet with captives freed, suggesting that whatever he faced, there was not measured in gold. The accounts hint that he encountered powers greater than himself, some not entirely human, some painfully political, and that he came back changed in ways the stories never fully explain. Because the Arthurian tradition is vast, it invites competing versions that serve different agendas. Followers of the White God claim he met one of their bishops and was humbled, abandoning older loyalties. Druids in Cymru argue the opposite, insisting he would never betray the foundations of his people. Some traditions go further and suggest Arthur was never only human, that he rose beyond his beginnings into something closer to a mythic guardian. That idea is used to explain why sightings of him continue long after the story places his death on a battlefield, struck down after conflict with his nephew Medraut, who seized the throne while Arthur campaigned elsewhere. What happens after that battle becomes the heart of the promise. Arthur's closest companions are said to have carried him away, claiming knowledge of a place where wounds could heal over centuries, rather than days. Some say he was taken to Avalon in the otherworld, where he sleeps until the time comes for his return. Others insist he entered a spiritual alliance with powers of the newer faith, preparing for a war that has not yet arrived. Either way, the core claim remains the same. Arthur is not simply gone, he is delayed. If Arthur represents return, Bayin represents choice in the face of collapsing order. Bayin, Inion Urchad, is remembered as a warrior princess, tied to the Ui Brún Siola, a woman who looks untouched by age, with long fair hair pulled back for battle and no sign of fatigue in her posture. She hides most of herself beneath armour reshaped to fit her frame. She carries a spear taller than she is, and a sword taken from a fallen Viking. Around her neck is the torque of royalty, and over her shoulders a fur-lined cape, practical in cold and symbolic in war. Her path was not originally forged in raids. Bayin trained for law. She aimed to become an arbiter, a judge, a figure who could steady disputes and elevate her kin's standing through authority built on reason rather than bloodshed. There was also another motive that is rarely admitted openly. The legal life promised purpose, and purpose was preferable to a slow, suffocating boredom in a world that expected women to stand quietly behind decisions made by others. Then an invitation arrived that changed the shape of her life. The king of Eilich called for the formation of a massive host, a fianna meant to break enemies and end the era of being hunted. The call did not exclude women. It asked for the strength of the entire people. Bayin understood immediately what that meant. A chance to step into a role the clergy had long discouraged. Religious authorities had pressed the idea that a woman's best life was limited to motherhood alone. Even Bayin's legal ambitions had drawn ridicule. She had been mocked for trying to settle disputes, undermined when she attempted to distribute food fairly, and forced to watch clerics argue that their status entitled them to more than farmers who actually produced the sustenance. When Bayin saw which powerful names supported the king of Eilich's message, her hesitation collapsed. The High King was aligned. The Queen of Tara was aligned. The war-minded nobility would answer. If the future was being decided by those willing to fight, then refusing to fight would mean letting others write the ending. Bayin stepped away from the life she had prepared for, armed herself, and entered the world of the Fianna. Her first action was aimed at Athcliath, held by Vikings, chosen not only as revenge but as logistics. Provisions win wars, and war was becoming a permanent condition. She led her people through raid after raid, often returning with enough to keep her clan alive and her reputation growing. Yet she did not immediately present herself as a subordinate to Eilich. Victory brings options, and Bayin began to act with the independence of a rising power. That independence has made her admired and feared in equal measure. Her people respected her as a voice of reason before. Now they celebrate her as a conquering figure, comparing her to the queens of older epics. What began as humility has shifted, slowly, into belief. Each success reinforces the idea that she might truly be what the songs are trying to turn her into. Where Bayin rises through battlefield confidence, Bividonas rises through craft, endurance, and a strange alliance that blurs the line between folklore and the real. He was born among miners and blacksmiths, raised in a family that treated tools as treasure and work as identity. Stories claim his bloodline reaches back to the Fir Bolg. And whether literal or symbolic, that claim carries weight. He grew into a heavily muscled man shaped by labour, with hair and beard that always looked dusted by stone, as if the earth never fully released him. When the twilight fell, mining communities suffered quickly. They produced metal, not food, and they relied on trade to fill their stores. As routes failed and neighbours tightened their own supplies, reserves emptied. Even the small spirits tied to mines, those that legends say knock to warn of danger, seem to fall silent from sheer exhaustion. Too much death leaves even superstition numb. Hunger turned toolmakers into targets. Bandits came. Vikings came. Worse things wandered out of the woods, drawn by desperation and weakness. In that world, a hammer was no longer enough. Bividonas traded his craft tools for a heavy axe, not out of love for violence, but because survival demanded it. Then something changed. Food appeared at doorsteps: milk, butter, dark bread, small provisions placed like gifts. The village understood the message in its own way. Offerings once given to unseen mine spirits were being returned, as if the old bargain had reversed. When raiders struck again, the attackers met resistance that should not have existed. The spirits of the deep, in the story, took up arms, and the raid ended quickly. Afterward, the survivors were guided away through hidden passages between realms, delivered to Eilich as if distance itself had been folded for their sake. Bividonas was not simply rescued, he was selected. He spent what felt like a year in the otherworld, though time there is never consistent with mortal counting, and he trained as an ambassador between humans and those subterranean powers. The change in him is described as physical as well as spiritual. His skin turned ashen, his eyes took on a metallic hue, and his understanding of stone and metal deepened until it resembled instinct. He returned to the mortal world at the gates of the great fortress of Eilich, arriving with a cart of black iron filled with works and tools, demanding an audience with the king, as if art itself were a form of nobility. The king he confronted was Muirchertach Uí Níl, and the decision was made with practical speed. A war leader needs equipment as much as soldiers. Bividonas became the favoured smith, crafting arms and armour for elite warriors and for the leaders of the Fianna. He established a workshop that was also an inn, a place where trade, shelter, and craft could overlap. Behind it lay something even more valuable, a direct route back to the Knocker kingdoms, later extended through new connections into other hidden realms, known for their mastery of forging. In an era when supply lines collapse, a doorway is worth more than gold. In Connaught, the story turns colder and more intimate. Creassa Inion Urchad, Queen of Connaught, is described as ruling a kingdom starving so severely that even the royal court cannot hide from the ache. It is one thing for peasants to go hungry, it is another for hunger to reach the hearth of a queen. The king, overwhelmed by despair, withdraws into himself, and authority shifts onto Creassa's shoulders. Nights lengthen for her, filled with calculation, negotiation, and the quiet terror of watching children thin, day by day. Rumours spread through the fortress of how tired she looks, how her face sharpens, how even her strength seems to be eroded by the same scarcity that is breaking the land. In her darkest hours, she begins to imagine mercies that feel unforgivable, and that is when the intervention arrives. One night, she is jolted awake by a woman's voice coming from her children's room. Creassa moves through the corridors with a blade in hand, expecting the worst. The sight she finds is not an intruder threatening her children, but her children eating rich pastries in the presence of a stranger cloaked in raven feathers. The visitor bows with the confidence of someone who does not fear a queen's anger. She presents a message and a plate of sliced apples, small symbols with heavy meaning, and she offers a single request: support the King of Eileach. Unify Ireland and reclaim the prosperity that has slipped away. Creassa understands immediately that this is not charity. It is recruitment. Yet desperation changes how choices are weighed. She sees a path out of humiliation and slow death. She storms into her husband's chamber and orders preparations for travel. When he asks why, she answers with tears and relief mixed together, speaking as if she can already feel the future shifting. Hope spreads through the fortress like a flame, finding dry wood. As she watches servants move with new energy, Creassa presses the message close and thanks the raven-cloaked woman. The reply is short, steady, and loaded with purpose. It is not spoken for the Queen alone. It is spoken for a cause that reaches beyond Connaught. Not every force fighting for unity belongs to the living. Kuroi MacDair is a figure wrapped in contradictions, remembered as a druid king of ancient Munster in the era of Cuchulainn, and then remembered again as something reborn. In life, pride and rivalry defined him. In death, those weaknesses are said to have burned away, leaving a colder, clearer purpose. As a seedy being, he can take many forms, but in human shape he appears as a middle-aged man with a long, braided beard and eyes that do not look like eyes at all, but polished stones that glow with an unnatural light. He carries a staff of elder wood, carved with intricate markings and set with iron at its head. And he wears robes decorated with symbols that speak to river, fish, and ritual. Around his neck is a torque worked with scenes that resemble ceremonies, older than the kingdoms now, fighting over scraps. Kuroi returns under orders from the Tuatha Dé Danann. Driven by a duty that offers no comfort, he crosses the mists and finds Ireland divided, its people fighting for food, sometimes even selling themselves to northern invaders to survive. The grief of that sight is described as real, but grief does not stop armies. At Brunnar Boyne, he opens a permanent threshold to the otherworld and releases a hunter tied to the goddess Ériu, a force meant to ensure she is not forgotten, to steer the druids toward her design, and to cleanse enemies who threaten the old powers. There is no triumph in this act. It costs lives, and Kuroi understands that saving a people can still mean sacrificing individuals. Yet he believes it is the last chance to prevent total collapse. Seeking a path to unity, Kuroi enters trance and tries to read what is coming. He sees through the eyes of a mounted warrior, armoured and strong, but the vision fights back. Something inside the horseman's spirit forces Kuroi out, as if the future is already guarded. That resistance captures his attention. He follows signs and omens until he finds the man from the vision, disguised as an ordinary traveller, seeking hospitality. The young ruler is Murchatash Uinil, and he welcomes the stranger into his hall. They speak through the night about the state of the land, the desperation of the clans, and the possibility of binding Ireland into a single will. Trust grows carefully as dawn approaches. Only then does Kuroi reveal what he is, and the next day he begins persuading other druids to serve this king, not for personal favour, but for the survival of the people. Then the stories shift again, from politics and war to the dangerous territory of beauty, pride, and consequence. Diamuida Ua Duipne is remembered as the most beautiful man to ever live, with eyes that caught the light and a smile that made enemies forget caution. That gift became a weakness, feeding vanity, shaping choices, and drawing attention that a warrior might have preferred to avoid. Yet beauty was only one aspect. He was also counted among the greatest fighters of his age, trained under Iongus Og and armed with blades whose names were spoken as if they carried their own fury. His spears were feared for wounds that did not easily heal. Even so, Diamuida is remembered as a man who cared about honour to the point of self-sabotage, sometimes choosing lesser weapons in battle because winning too easily felt shameful. His personal life carries the same pattern of blessing and loss that marks so many Celtic heroes. He meets Sadaba while hunting, a woman trapped in the form of a deer by a curse placed by a rejected suitor. Fionn's hounds recognise her humanity, and she is brought into his home, where the curse breaks within the boundaries of his land. They marry and hope returns. Then the curse returns as well. While Fionn is away, the one who cursed her before finds her again and forces the transformation back upon her. She vanishes into the woods, and despite searching, Fionn never finds her. He later discovers their child, Oisin, caught between forms until the boy becomes fully human before his eyes, destined to become a hero in his own right. Across the Great Isles, one Viking name travels faster than any sail. Gofraid commands the largest raiding flotilla, still moving with purpose through the cold seas, and his presence functions like a roaming court of violence. He does not settle. He circles, strikes, vanishes, returns again, enforcing Norse rule wherever local rulers grow bold enough to resist. Those who have seen him describe the same image: a hard fighter standing forward on the prow, hair pulled back and whipped by wind, scanning shorelines as if every bay is already his. The deep chill that breaks other men seems to slide past him. Whether that comes from temperament, luck, or something stranger, the result is the same. He keeps moving when others slow. His war is not only against kingdoms, it is personal. Gofraid and Muirchertach, Uinil, the king of Aileach, have become locked in a feud that no treaty can soften. Each has taken blood from the other's house. Gofraid killed Muirchertach's father. Muirchertach answered by killing Gofraid's son. After that, every victory becomes a challenge to be outdone, each man refusing to let the other be the one whose grief becomes legend. Sailors whisper that fate itself is feeding the rivalry, as if unseen spinners of destiny have decided the balance of power must remain unresolved until a final reckoning arrives. Superstition or not, the pattern holds. When one gains ground, the other strikes back harder. Gofraid believes he understands the kind of leader Éire has produced. He watches how fiercely Muirchertach's followers cling to him, and he recognizes something more dangerous than a single warlord. He sees old loyalties returning, older beliefs gathering strength, and local powers that feel rooted in the land itself, pushing back against the invaders like thorn and briar. The sea has become less reliable as well. Storms arrive with the wrong moods. Shapes move in the fog that do not behave like ordinary waves. Some crews swear they have seen enormous warped figures rising out of the water long enough to smash ships, before sinking back into darkness. Whether these accounts are true in every detail matters less than the effect they have. Confidence cracks when the ocean itself feels hostile. That is why Gofraid drives his kinsman Sitric to keep pressure on the Gales at every opportunity. In Gofraid's mind, there is no time left for feasts, hostage bargains, and careful posturing. The danger is not tomorrow. It is already growing. He refuses to accept the idea that a true High King might rise and bind the Gaelic kingdoms into a single fighting force, because he knows what that would mean for Norse survival. Sitric, however, spends too long rooted in Ath Cliath, wrapped in local politics and the comfort of holding a seat rather than hunting a future threat. Gofraid sees that as blindness. A kingdom cannot debate its way out of a collapsing world. The one thing that unsettles him more than armies is the language of omens. Seers among the Norse speak of a great serpent forming from wealth, blood, and the dead, a slow waking power tied to the people of Ireland itself. In those warnings, the creature does not choose sides. It consumes everything in its path, Celt and Viking alike. Gofraid has survived long enough to respect patterns, even when he hates them. He cannot decide whether the prophecy is a weapon meant to frighten him, or a truth that will arrive no matter how many villages burn first. In the same landscape of shadow politics, Queen Gormfl, Ingen Flan Sinna, holds a different kind of power, the kind that rarely marches at the front of an army, yet can still decide where armies go. She is feared for reasons that cannot be counted easily. Her brother is the High King. Her son is the King of Éire. And her influence spreads far beyond any single court, carried by messengers, agents, and quiet agreements that reach into rival territories. People treat her with respect because they do not know how many watchers she has placed nearby, or how many private failures she has already learned about and stored away for later use. Those who meet her remember her face before they remember her words. Dark hair, a strict gaze, sharp lines that suggest she has never had the luxury of softness. She often wears dark clothing, and at times a mantle of raven feathers that signals an affiliation with older, harsher traditions. She does not appear alone. Protectors remain close, not as decoration, but as a reminder that even a queen who wins through intelligence still lives in an era where knives solve arguments. Her philosophy is simple and cold. Staying in power requires abandoning comforting illusions about honour. A ruler who refuses hard choices becomes a victim in someone else's story. Gormflath's greatest priority is her son's survival and rise, and she measures cost in blood without flinching. If violence prevents a greater collapse, she will choose violence. If eliminating threats clears a path for Muirchertach, she will clear that path. This is not presented as cruelty for pleasure. It is presented as the logic of a queen who believes mercy without strength is another form of surrender. The return of hidden Druidic networks has altered the board beneath her feet. Old magical knowledge, once treated as fading superstition, is becoming politically relevant again. Gormfl adapts quickly. She intends to learn what is needed to keep control in a world where belief and power are folding back into each other. Her anger is not only personal, it is cultural and political, aimed at invaders who dare challenge Tara's legacy and at foreign gods carried on foreign ships. In her mind, the Isles are not a place where outsiders get to write the ending. She intends to reshape the war as if it were a strategy game, moving pieces in the dark, turning rivals into tools, and forcing the future to bend toward her design. She does not hide that she has a role to play in the gathering her son is preparing. Plans will be set. Shadows will be armed with purpose. The next stage will not be improvised. Not every figure in this era rises through lineage or conquest. Some arrive through suffering and obsession, carried forward like a curse that refuses to burn out. Kian Gwenchlan is remembered first for the absence that defines him. He is tall and imposing, yet what unsettles people most is the hollow space where eyes should be. His face is marked by old wounds that never seem fully healed, and his body looks stretched thin, as if starvation has become part of his shape. His teeth appear too sharp, his nails too long, and his presence has the wrong stillness, like someone half detached from the rules of ordinary life. Accounts of his origin shift, depending on who tells them, but a few details repeat. He is said to have died in confinement during the spread of the dominant faith, refusing conversion even under pressure. In the moment of death, he is said to have uttered a prophecy that became attached to his name, the kind of words people repeat because they are frightened of what they might mean. Instead of passing peacefully into the lands of the dead, the story claims his spirit was seized and bound to Crom Cruach, a dark and ancient power associated with broken vows and old terror. In that place, Kian's hatred was not soothed. It was sharpened and given direction. He returned not as a true rebirth, but as a thing pushed back into the world with unfinished purpose. The power that sent him did not grant life as mortals understand it. It granted motion, endurance, and a mission. Kian became both champion and instrument, driven to spread a creeping madness described as the Red Thirst, to undermine enemies of the old gods, and to hunt those seen as chosen warriors of rival faiths. A double-edged sword was given to him in the tale, one edge promised as revenge, the other framed as divine judgment. The weapon is a symbol of what he has become, a man whose pain has been converted into a cause so absolute it cannot easily distinguish justice from hunger. If Kian represents obsession, Lorfroded Fargog represents the lingering after-image of Arthur's world. He is remembered as a massive warrior, bald-headed by choice, refusing helmets as if daring fate to try. His beard was said to hang low on his chest, and he rode a horse so large it seemed built for a giant rather than a man. In Arthur's court he was celebrated as a master of mounted combat, the kind of fighter who could break lines through speed and confidence alone. The most famous object tied to him is a blade spoken of as one of Britain's great treasures, a knife with a reputation that grew beyond its size. After Arthur's fall, Lorfroded was counted among those who carried the king's body away and helped seed the story of Arthur's eventual return. He then faded back into Cymru, waiting, watching, and vanishing into rumour. Now, in the era of Twilight, reports circulate that a rider matching his description has been seen again in the woods, calling warriors together as if preparing for a war that was always expected. Some claim he serves a prophesied deliverer, known by another title. Others say someone is wearing his name like armour to strengthen a political claim. The uncertainty does not weaken the effect. The legend alone recruits hearts. Another return stirs even deeper discomfort. Medb, remembered as a queen from centuries past, has reappeared near Tara, and her presence forces the question of legitimacy into the open. Many treat her as royalty of the highest order, ready to place the whole island beneath her crown. Others hesitate, especially those bound to Druidic, factions with their own plans, and those aligned with the dominant faith who see her as a dangerous sign of old powers rising. Descriptions of Medb emphasize how far from ordinary she appears. Her hair is dark, her skin carries a grey cast, and faint traces of ancient markings are said to linger on her body, like ink that time could not scrub away. She wears an iron crown shaped with sharp points, and her clothing blends regal display with the language of war. She does not always carry a visible weapon, but her hands are described as ending in claw-like nails, a reminder that she does not need steel in order to harm a challenger. Medb has established a fortified camp near Tara, and speaks openly of seeking a king consort, not as an equal ruler, but as a partner who would serve her reign. Those who approach are not greeted with warm negotiation, they are met with trials. The first is to face one of her champions. None who have attempted it are said to have survived. This does not slow the flow of would-be suitors, because in desperate times people gamble on impossible odds. Her political stance is clear. She opposes efforts to drag Ireland closer to Tir na Nog through vast ritual schemes. She wants unity through direct war. Gather the Celts, drive out invaders with open force, and let the future be decided on battlefields, rather than in secret ceremonies. Many have already pledged themselves to her, convinced that her return is not coincidence, but a signal that the world is changing and old crowns are being tested again. Then there is Mug Ruth, a figure who appears less like a person and more like a walking riddle. He is described as a blind druid who slips in and out of reality like a dream that refuses to end. He wears a cloak made from the hide of a white bull and a helmet fashioned from the skull of an enormous bird. Age bends his spine and grey dominates his hair and face. Some insist he lived in the time of the son of the white god. Others place him in the reign of famous high kings far back in Ireland's memory. Others say he died thousands of years ago, and what appears now is only a ghost wearing an old name. When questioned, he laughs and answers with puzzles, as if certainty is something he refuses to grant. Two objects always follow him in the stories. One is a dark shield decorated with star-like markings and edged in silver. The other is a stone carried in his hand, perfectly smooth, too ordinary to be harmless. When water is near, the stone is said to become an eel with venom in its bite. Around him cling further claims that he can grow to enormous size, that he can call storms, that he can turn men rigid with fear as if they were carved from rock. He is also linked to a strange flying vehicle, pulled by oxen, an image so vivid that listeners repeat it, even when they doubt it. Some warn that looking upon that chariot brings blindness. Whether believed or not, the warning keeps people cautious. Mug Ruith returned to Ireland following faint calls from the Sidir, and once on Gaelic soil he began dreaming of a warrior he believed had been marked by fate. The vision showed a man of Neil's bloodline, a future leader with corruption around him like smoke, yet with a heartbeat aligned to Tara's sacred legacy. In that dream, fury was not a flaw. It was a tool waiting to be directed. The young king would need guidance, because the forces gathering against Ireland were not only human. Champions of rival faiths and foreign gods would step onto the field, and ordinary courage would not be enough. Led by signs, Mug Ruith arrived at Huisnich, a place tradition treats as a spiritual centre where the land itself still holds warmth. Soon after, a warband hunting through the region halted when they saw him waiting on a green rise, smiling as if he had been expecting them. The leader of that band was Murchatas Ui Neil. The two spoke for hours, challenging each other on belief, law, tactics, and the meaning of unity. By the end of the exchange, the bond formed was not merely political, it was described as brotherhood. Afterward, Mug Ruth led the king toward a sacred water associated with Lu. There, a great falcon waited, silver-feathered and severe, watching as if judging whether Muirchertach was worthy of attention. The message that reached the king was not gentle. It carried accusation, abandonment, and the weight of neglected duty. Muirchertach did not collapse under it. He answered with a vow to repair what had been broken through strength and strategy, to save Ireland from freezing into death, and to preserve as many Gaels as could be preserved. It is the kind of vow that sounds reckless, until one remembers the alternative is slow extinction. Mug Ruth then stepped forward with a confidence that made the falcon seem less terrifying. He spoke as if the bird could hide from a king's resolve, but not from a blind man's deeper sight. The falcon settled on Muirchertach's shoulder, and a torque appeared on the king's neck, locked in place, decorated with symbols of harvest and ending in falcon heads. The bond was set, not simply alliance, but obligation. King, druid, and divine envoy tied together by the kind of oath that does not loosen when fear arrives. Muirchertach Uí Níl himself is described in the language of a war king: long hair, long beard, a body built for battle. Yet the detail people remember most is his cloak. It is made from flayed Fomorian skin in the story, a grotesque trophy turned into a warning. Beneath it, he wears layered armour and a heavy torque, and he carries a sword said to command the wind. Whether the sword is truly enchanted matters less than the aura it creates around him. His enemies believe he is protected by something more than iron. His purpose is singular. He believes the Gaels must restore their honour in the eyes of the old pantheon through war, and that the invaders and the rival faith must be driven out with force. That obsession began with a catastrophe near Athcliath, where Gaelic kings fell and his father died. In grief, Muirchertach reached a conclusion that hardened into doctrine. The Gaels were defeated not because they lacked courage, but because they were divided. Clans fought clans. Kingdoms undermined kingdoms. Warriors sold service to foreign rulers. Ireland bled itself while outsiders advanced. Muirchertach chose to make unity into a weapon. He leads an elite warband called the Skin Cloaks, striking Vikings repeatedly with a cruelty meant to break confidence as much as bodies. One infamous act intensified the feud at the heart of the Isles. His warriors killed the son of a powerful sea king and left proof behind so the father would know exactly who had taken that life. After that, the rivalry became a cycle of kin for kin, and each strike risked consuming both bloodlines entirely. When the world shifted into permanent twilight, Ireland's green turned pale and fragile, and even Éire began to starve. Fear drove the people into factions. Some concluded the white god was punishing them and turned fanatic. Others returned to the old gods out of defiance and desperation. Muirchertach understood that hesitation would tear his kingdom apart. Rumour says his mother arrived with counsel, accompanied by figures whose presence carried the weight of old power, and after that meeting his choice became absolute. He expelled those who refused to return to the worship of the Tuatha Dé Danann, and he tore down churches and chapels tied to the rival faith, treating them not as sacred spaces but as signs of occupation. Soon after, Druids entered his stronghold bringing food, rights, and the promise of a wider alliance. Campfire Talk claims they told him he must become a true High King by binding himself to the spirit of the land, unifying Ireland on both the mortal and the fey side. That union, in the rumour, would grant access to forces far beyond ordinary armies. In the darkest versions of the story, the same movement also hints at a larger ritual meant to shift the island closer to the otherworld itself. Not as conquest, but as survival. Whether that plan is salvation or catastrophe depends entirely on who is telling it. Behind many of these legends stands Myrddin, the wandering master of disguise whose face is never fully consistent in the tales. Some say he appeared as an old man with a white beard. Others describe different visages entirely. The only detail that persists is a golden medallion marked with a dragon's head, carried as if it were a signature. Myrddin is remembered as a magician who learned from both druids and fae, mastering prophecy, transformation, and weathercraft. At one point, the stories even place him briefly on a throne in Dyfed, though that reign ends in disaster. After a terrible battle that kills his siblings, grief shatters him, and he flees into the wilderness, abandoning kingship and living as a forager among trees. He later emerges as a wild figure who still speaks with precision about what has not happened yet. A sister named Gwendid is said to have drawn him back toward clarity through a powerful song. But court life overwhelms him, and he is chained and tested to prove whether his prophecies are real. The tests fail to expose him as a fraud. Predictions come true in ways that terrify those who try to trick him, until even the king decides it is safer to send him away than to keep him near. Myrddin returns to the woods and builds an observatory, studying stars as if the sky is the only place that does not lie. Kings and poets visit him there, hungry for direction, and he speaks of a deliverer figure whose identity is never settled cleanly. When asked directly whether the prophecy points to Arthur, he refuses to answer and continues forward into far future events, as if the question itself is too small. Eventually he leaves the woods again, driven by an aim known only to him, and he finds Arthur, guiding him according to a plan shaped by prophecy. He advises Arthur and Uther for years, then vanishes again with the same mystery that defines his life. Some say he returned to his solitude. Some claim he renounced his gifts. Others believe he simply stepped sideways into a place beyond ordinary reach, waiting for the moment his words will be needed again. Oisín's story is different in tone, but it carries the same warning about time and change. He is described as fair-haired and fair-skinned, an unusual look compared to his parents. His birth itself is marked by transformation. His mother, Zadba, had been forced into the shape of a deer by a spiteful curse, and Oisín entered the world as a fawn. When his father Fionn found him years later, the child shifted into human form, and Oisín grew into a handsome but stern-faced warrior, a man shaped by loss long before he could name it. As an adult, Oisín becomes king of Tir na Nog, gaining the throne through a rare transition that is remembered as almost peaceful. He fathers a son, Oscar, and rules in that otherworld realm for what feels like a short span. Then, he learns the truth that breaks so many visitors. Time does not move the same way across worlds. 3 years in Tir na Nog have become 300 years in the mortal lands. Oisín insists on returning anyway. He is given a magical horse for the journey, along with a warning that carries absolute consequence. If he touches the ground of the mundane world, the lost years will strike him all at once. When Oisín rides back, Ireland feels unfamiliar. The old order has shifted. A new faith has spread through the land, carried by Saint Padraig. Oisín meets the saint and questions him at length, examining the claims of the new god with the curiosity of someone who has seen more than one reality. Yet curiosity does not become conversion. Oisín rejects the demand to abandon the older world, and tension hardens between the two men. In exchange for the saint's patience during questioning, Oisín recounts the deeds of the Fianna, stories so large Padraig refuses to believe them. To test the claims, the saint sets Oisín a challenge involving a bull. Oisín completes the task, but in the struggle he is pulled from the saddle. The moment his body meets the earth, the warning fulfills itself. Age rushes in. The centuries he avoided catch him like a wave. Padraig finds him collapsed beside the animal, no longer the strong warrior from the saddle, but an old man at the edge of death. Oscar, grandson of the legendary Fionn mac Cumhail, was born during a period when the once-honoured brotherhood of the Fianna had begun to change. What had once been a disciplined order of warriors devoted to ancient codes slowly drifted toward excess and complacency. The ideals that had guided them for generations began to fade, replaced by ambition and pride. Unlike many of the warriors whose stories filled the old songs, Oscar's beginnings were tied to the otherworld. He was born in Tir na Nog, the timeless realm beyond the mortal lands. Because of this, many believed that some part of that other realm lived within him. Even as a child, he was said to possess an unusual presence, as though he carried echoes of a place untouched by ordinary time. When he grew into adulthood, Oscar became known as a striking figure. His appearance was not extravagant, yet there was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. Warriors and kings alike came to recognize his name on the battlefield. Throughout his life, he fought in numerous conflicts that would shape the fate of the lands. His strength and skill brought down many powerful enemies. Among those he defeated was a warrior named Sinsar, a man who boldly claimed dominion over the entire world. Battles like these helped build Oscar's reputation as one of the most formidable fighters of his age. But the greatest conflict of his life would not come from a foreign enemy. Instead, it erupted within Ireland itself. The High King Cairbre Lifechair and the Fianna eventually clashed in a war that would bring an end to the warrior brotherhood's dominance. Divisions within the Fianna had already weakened them. Some members abandoned their companions and joined Caerbre's side, turning what should have been a united force into a fractured one. The battle that followed became one of the most tragic confrontations in the memory of the Isles. Oscar fought with relentless determination despite being captured and bound with heavy steel chains. Even restrained, he refused to surrender. In the midst of the struggle, he used those very chains as weapons. With them, he struck down King Cairbre himself. The act came at a terrible cost. Oscar was mortally wounded during the clash, dying at the moment of victory. His death marked far more than the loss of a warrior. For Fionn mac Cumhail, the fall of his grandson was the breaking point. The old leader abandoned the battlefield and vanished from history. After that moment, the stories of the Fianna grow quiet. With Oscar gone and Fionn no longer leading them, the brotherhood seemed to dissolve almost overnight. In the tales that followed, the Fianna fade from the narrative of the world as though they stepped away from history itself. Only much later would their names begin to surface again, whispered in connection with the wars against Viking invaders. Another figure remembered in the legends of the Isles is Padan Baesrud, a man whose life bridged cultures that often stood in opposition. Padan came from the northern lands that would eventually form the Kingdom of Alba. His ancestry linked both the Celtic peoples and the southern invaders who had moved into the region. Growing up between two worlds left him feeling that he belonged fully to neither. Rather than allowing that isolation to weaken him, Padan turned it into an advantage. From an early age, he learned how to speak and negotiate between different cultures. By the time he reached adulthood, he had built a reputation as someone capable of moving comfortably among rival factions. His skills allowed him to secure a place within the military structures of the invading forces, while also establishing authority among the Cymry tribes. Though he was not remembered as a larger-than-life hero, his talent for strategy and diplomacy earned him significant respect. Padan became closely associated with a remarkable garment, later known as the Red Coat. one of the famous treasures connected to Britain's legendary past. The coat gained its reputation through Padan's ownership, and stories about it circulated widely. At one point, King Arthur himself was said to have attempted to steal the coat, while Padan slept inside a church. Despite this unusual beginning, Padan later sided with Arthur and became one of the figures who supported the spread of Arthur's growing legend. In the years that followed, Padan's path shifted toward religion. He joined the church devoted to the white god and eventually became honoured as one of its saints. Some accounts claim that his influence even helped guide Arthur toward a more just and balanced rule. After Padan's death, the political legacy of his family continued to grow. His descendants used his reputation and alliances to establish new authority across the region. Over time, his lineage played a role in the founding of the Kingdom of Gwynedd, with his grandson becoming its first ruler. Though Padan's origins lay in lands that would later belong to Alba, his influence helped shape the identity of the Cymry people. His story reflects the complicated blend of cultures that defined the Isles during this turbulent period. While figures like Padan built their influence through diplomacy, others carved their place through war. Ragnar, ruler of Northumbria, stands as one of the most determined Viking leaders of his time. Those who encountered him often remarked on the firmness of his expression and the sense that he possessed an unbreakable resolve. Ragnar shared blood ties with both Sihtric and Gofraid, powerful figures within the Norse world of the Isles. As king of Northumbria, he ruled over a territory surrounded by danger. To the north, the kingdoms of Strathclyde and Alba challenged his borders. Within his own lands, followers of the White God, both Saxon and Norse, grew restless under pagan leadership. From the south, expanding Anglo-Saxon powers watched for opportunities to strike. Ragnar's rise was shaped by a series of campaigns carried out alongside his relatives. After Norse forces reclaimed the cities of Athcliath and Waterford, Ragnar turned his attention toward Jorvik, a city whose control meant influence over all of Northumbria. The first major clash came against a combined army led by Eldred of Banba and Constantine of Alba. The battle was costly, but Ragnar ultimately prevailed and recaptured Jorvik. That victory opened the door for a gradual consolidation of Northumbria under his rule. His position remained unstable. A second crisis erupted when Viking converts to the White God rejected Ragnar's pagan leadership. These rebels formed an alliance with the powerful Lady of the Mercians, hoping to overthrow him. The rebellion ended abruptly when their Saxon ally died unexpectedly. Without her support, the uprising collapsed, and those who had betrayed Ragnar faced harsh punishment according to Viking custom. By the time the strange darkness, known as the Celtic Twilight, spread across the lands, Jorvik had become a city under immense strain. Years of warfare had drained its food stores, and disease spread easily through crowded streets. Social tension, religious conflict, and hunger threatened to tear the city apart. Only the arrival of supplies sent by Gofraid from Athcliath prevented immediate disaster. Not all influential figures of the Isles were kings or warriors. Some belonged to older races whose stories stretched back, long before the rise of human kingdoms. Seanan was known as a wandering under-king among the beings often called knockers. These dwarf-like figures, along with their distant relatives, the Dvergars, were said to be among the earliest inhabitants of the many realms connected to the Isles. Across countless cycles of history, civilizations rose and fell. Seanan understood that survival depended on adaptation. When powerful forces such as the Fomorians and the Tuatha Dé Danann struggled for control of Ireland, Seanan and his allies crafted weapons capable of influencing those conflicts. Yet he rarely committed himself entirely to one side. Instead, he negotiated with all factions, offering his services as a guardian of vaults and treasuries belonging to the great powers of the world. He remained neutral during several legendary battles, though he never accepted the idea that his people were lesser beings. Through trade, negotiation, and careful alliances, Seanan worked constantly to ensure that the Knockers were recognized for their importance. When rumors of a coming apocalyptic conflict began to spread, Seanan organized a grand gathering among his kindred. Kings of the Knockers and the Dvergars met in secret celebration and discussion. By the end of that gathering, an alliance had formed. The leaders swore blood brotherhood and pledged to resist the fate that Norse mythology predicted for the world. Their pact created a coalition dedicated to weakening foreign invaders and preserving the hidden realms beneath the Isles. Among the heroes remembered across Ireland, few stand taller in legend than Setanta, later known as Cú Chulainn. He was born to Daichtín, daughter of the King of Ulster. His birth occurred during a strange event involving the hunt for magical birds. Those pursuing the birds took shelter in a remote dwelling where Daichtín gave birth, while outside a mare also delivered twin foals. When morning came, the house that had sheltered them had vanished. Stories about Setanta's father remain uncertain. At one point, the god Lugh appeared and claimed the child as his own. Some believed this claim was true, while others suspected the god merely recognized the boy's potential. Daichtín never confirmed the story and never told her son of the claim. As a young boy, Setanta once played a game of hurling with other children when the King of Ulster passed by. Impressed by the boy's skill, the king invited him to visit later that evening. Unfortunately, he forgot about the invitation and released his guard hound to patrol the grounds. When Setanta arrived, the hound attacked him. Forced to defend himself, the boy killed the animal by smashing it against a standing stone. The king regretted the loss of his loyal hound, but acknowledged that the mistake had been his own. Setanta offered to raise a new guard dog and protect the king's home until it was fully trained. From that promise, he received the name Cú Chulainn, meaning the Hound of Culan. As an adult, he became a fearsome warrior, training extensively on the Isle of Skye and mastering numerous combat techniques. His most famous deed occurred during the conflict known as the Cattle Raid of Cooley. When Queen Medb led an army against Ulster to capture a prized bull, Cú Chulainn stood alone at a river crossing and challenged the invading army to single combat. Bound by honour, the enemy champions accepted his challenges one after another. For months he held the army in place through these duels. During the conflict, he encountered a mysterious woman who offered him her love. When he refused, she revealed herself as the goddess Morrigan. She attempted to hinder him in battle by taking the form of different animals, but he ultimately forgave her and healed her wounds afterward. Despite his victories, Cú Chulainn eventually suffered mortal injuries. At that moment, Lugh appeared and used divine power to heal him, confirming his claim as the warrior's father. Cú Chulainn returned to battle with renewed strength and cut through hundreds of enemies. His death came later through a tragic twist of fate. Bound by a personal taboo that forbade him from eating dog meat, he faced a terrible choice when offered such food by a host. Refusing would insult the household, but accepting would break his sacred vow. He chose hospitality and ate the meal, weakening himself before his final battle. When he was mortally wounded, Cú Chulainn tied himself to a standing stone so that he would die on his feet, facing his enemies to the end. Another powerful Viking ruler emerged from the lineage of Ivar the Boneless. Sitric, known as Sitric Quarren, became king of Athcliath, a city that served as one of the most important trade centres in the Celtic world. Sitrick grew up surrounded by stories of his legendary ancestors. Among the brutal traditions associated with his family was the infamous Blood Eagle execution, a punishment designed to terrify enemies. From a young age, Sitrick developed an intense devotion to Odin. In an act meant to mirror the god's own sacrifice for wisdom, he offered one of his eyes in ritual devotion. Afterward, his fortunes seemed to rise quickly. At 16, he encountered a mysterious traveller who delivered an omen that inspired him to seek conquest. Sitrick invited his cousins Ragnar and Gofraid to join him on an expedition, and the three leaders gathered their followers. They sailed from their ancestral homeland with small but loyal fleets. Victory followed them across the seas. They recaptured Jorvik, expanded through Northumbria, and eventually sailed to Ireland. There, they seized control of Athcliath, transforming it into a powerful Norse stronghold. Each cousin established rule over different territories. Ragnar governed Jorvik, Gofraid controlled Northumbria, and Sitrick took the throne of Athcliath. When the strange darkness of the Celtic twilight descended upon the Isles, Sitrick faced widespread rebellion from local populations. He crushed the uprisings and expanded the slave trade, turning his city into one of the wealthiest ports in the region. His growing power attracted many enemies. Constantine of Alba attempted to challenge him, but was forced to retreat when Sitrick's allies launched attacks elsewhere. Meanwhile, the southern king Athelstan watched carefully, recognizing both the threat and opportunity that Sitrick represented. Not all influential voices carried swords. Among the most remarkable figures wandering the Isles was Taliesin, widely considered the greatest poet ever known. Taliesin's origins remain uncertain. Early stories describe him as a young bard travelling through Cymru, reciting tales of ancient heroes. According to his own accounts, he had witnessed many of the events he described, even though they occurred generations earlier. Many listeners initially dismissed him as a storyteller exaggerating his experiences. Yet the centuries passed, and Taliesin continued to appear unchanged. Gradually, the storyteller became a legend himself. His poetry carried extraordinary power. Words spoken by Taliesin could move warriors to tears or persuade armies to abandon their march. Courts across the otherworld sought to claim him as their bard. The Tuatha Dé Danann, the Seelie and Unseelie courts, and many lesser realms offered him wealth and protection. Taliesin valued his freedom too much to serve only one master. Instead, he crafted a remarkable solution. He promised each court that he would serve them, provided he never had to break another oath. By making identical promises to many patrons, he ensured that none could claim exclusive loyalty. To fulfill the arrangement, he also vowed to bring stories and knowledge to the Celtic peoples. Through this clever agreement, he effectively secured immortality while remaining free to travel. Rumours claim that he even convinced the Dagda to halt the sun briefly so that he could finalise the arrangement with every court before anyone discovered the trick. Whatever favour he owes the Dagda remains unknown. Today, Taliesin wanders freely between worlds, gathering and spreading stories with the protection of every court bound to his service. One final figure stands at the centre of prophecy. Yab Daragan is not a personal name but a title meaning the foretold king of the Britons. Ancient prophecies describe a ruler who will unite the Celtic peoples and lead them against foreign invaders. Some believe the title refers to the eventual return of King Arthur. Others believe it belongs to a new leader. In the forests of Cymru, a man has stepped forward claiming the title. He possesses pale blue eyes so light they almost appear blind, yet they carry sharp awareness. His hair is white despite his youth, and his body bears dark tattoos he refuses to explain. He speaks little about his past, saying only that the markings came from the day he lost everything. Though some doubt his identity, many warriors have begun to follow him. His message is simple. The Celtic lands should not retreat into other realms to escape invasion. Instead, they must unite and reclaim their homeland. In battle, he demonstrates both strategic intelligence and personal skill. Armed with an ancient spear and sword said to belong to the Fianna, he leads growing forces through the woods of Cymru. Alan Varvek grew up carrying the burden of a fallen kingdom. He was the grandson of the last ruler of Bridg and the rightful heir to a throne that no longer existed. His lineage carried a reputation for wild, untamed appearances, and Alan was no exception. His blonde hair rarely stayed in order, falling in thick strands across his face, and though he was still young, a rough and uneven beard covered his jaw. When he rode or marched to war, he wore chainmail over his travelling clothes, a simple iron circlet resting on his head. At his side hung a short sword, while a bow was rarely far from reach. His early life was marked by defeat and exile. After the destruction of Bridg, Alan and his father, Mathwedoi, the Count of Poher, were forced to abandon their homeland. Their capital, Nantes, had been devastated, leaving little hope for immediate recovery. With support from the King of Francia, they attempted to reclaim their lands from Viking control, but each effort failed. The surviving Breton nobility eventually fled across the sea to Britain, seeking refuge under the protection of King Aethelstan. The king agreed to shelter them, but the arrangement carried its own conditions. To seal the alliance, Aethelstan became the godfather of the young Alan, a bond formalized through baptism in the church devoted to the white god. As Alan grew older, he trained constantly under the guidance of his father and the court of Aethelstan. The king's brother Edmund, known for his fairness and discipline, also played a role in shaping the young exile's education. Through years of instruction, Alan became a capable fighter and an increasingly clever strategist. His reputation for unconventional thinking earned him a nickname among his companions. Instead of relying on traditional battlefield formations, Alan preferred ambushes, hidden traps, and sudden strikes. These methods allowed him to defeat stronger opponents through planning rather than brute strength. Because of this, many began to call him the Fox. For them, he was not simply a warrior, but a symbol of restoration. One day, they believed, the heir of Bridg would return and reclaim the lands that had been taken from them. Among the scholars remembered across the Isles, few held a reputation equal to that of Bede. Though long dead, his influence remained deeply embedded in the intellectual life of the region. Bede was born into a noble family near two important monastic centres in northern Britain. From a young age, he entered the religious community associated with these monasteries, dedicating his life to learning and scholarship. The monastery at Jarrow soon became one of the most important centres of study in the northern lands. Within that environment, Bede distinguished himself as one of the most remarkable scholars of his generation. He devoted himself to the study of theology, astronomy, history, and the calculation of the calendar used by the church. His fascination with measuring time led him to refine the methods used to determine the dates of religious celebrations. Over the course of a long career, he produced works covering many areas of knowledge available during his era. His most famous accomplishment was a multi-volume history that traced the story of the peoples of Britain from the Roman invasion under Julius Caesar to his own lifetime. Although Bede personally followed the teachings of the White God, his writings eventually became valued by many different communities across the Isles. Even in an age marked by religious division, his historical record offered a shared account of the past that both pagans and Christians could consult. His burial site became marked by a carved figure representing him as he appeared near the end of his life. The statue depicts a man with long hair and beard, dressed in flowing robes and holding a writing quill. The artistic style reflects northern traditions while also drawing inspiration from older Roman imagery. Another figure remembered with admiration throughout the Celtic world was Brendan, a monk whose life combined faith with remarkable journeys across the sea. During his lifetime, Brendan gained recognition as both a scholar and an explorer. He travelled extensively across the islands and coastlines of the Celtic world, founding monasteries, preaching to distant communities, and spreading the teachings of his faith wherever he went. His most famous journey began with an ambitious voyage into unknown waters. Brendan and his companions constructed a large vessel made from animal hides, stretched over a wooden frame. 14 monks prepared to accompany him on what was expected to be a 40-day journey. Though, at the last moment, 2 more volunteers joined the expedition. The group sailed westward into open waters. The first weeks passed peacefully under favourable weather. Later, they encountered powerful currents and shifting winds that tested both their ship and their faith. Brendan remained confident that their journey had a purpose. Eventually, they reached a distant land unlike anything they had seen before. The island was filled with lush plants and bright flowers, and birds of many colours filled the skies. According to the accounts that later circulated, some of those birds even appeared capable of speech. The monks explored the region for many years. The land seemed untouched by winter, and its climate remained gentle throughout their stay. Some later traditions suggested that Brendan had discovered a gateway into the otherworld. Others believed he had reached a hidden paradise. After 7 years, the travellers encountered a vast river where a mysterious figure waited along the shore. The being warned them not to venture farther. Brendan refused to describe this encounter in detail, never naming the figure or explaining its nature. Taking the warning seriously, the monks turned their ship back toward Ireland. Brendan later established a monastery along the western coast, near a mountain that would eventually bear his name. Among the saints of Ireland, few were as widely loved as Bridg of Kildare. Born into a noble family, she was expected to marry and strengthen alliances between powerful clans. Instead, she rejected that path and dedicated herself to religious life. Together with several companions, she founded a small religious community. They chose to build their settlement near a great oak tree, which inspired the name Kildare, meaning the Church of the Oak. Through relentless dedication, Bridg transformed the small settlement into an important centre of learning and spiritual life. Stories about her described a woman who rarely slept, spending long nights writing manuscripts and illuminating sacred texts. Her reputation eventually spread across the Isles. Bridg became the leader of numerous convents throughout Ireland and developed an unusual system of leadership, in which the abbess of a religious house also exercised authority over surrounding communities. Under her guidance, the settlement at Kildare expanded into a thriving centre of culture and education. Students travelled from distant regions to study art, writing, and metalwork under the supervision of the monastery. Some observers even claimed that the illuminated manuscripts produced there seemed almost supernatural in their beauty. Whether those claims were exaggerated or not, Kildare became widely respected as a beacon of knowledge. Bridg's influence elevated Ireland's reputation among the followers of the White God across Europe. Even centuries later, she remained one of the most revered saints of the island. Another pair of religious figures gained recognition through their missionary work across distant lands. Bridg the Younger and her brother Andrew devoted their lives to spreading the teachings they had received in their early training. Both had studied under a respected teacher before travelling to Italy to assist in establishing religious communities. Andrew eventually rose to the position of archdeacon, helping to guide the clergy of the region. Bridg took on a leadership role within a monastery in northern Italy, before choosing to live in solitude in the mountains. There, she became known for her medical knowledge, treating the sick and injured who sought her help. Local stories claim that an unseen spiritual guide aided her healing abilities. Bridg herself refused to discuss such matters, insisting that gifts from the divine should never be questioned. Andrew's reputation also grew through stories of miracles and acts of compassion. When he healed the daughter of a nobleman, he refused any reward, declaring that divine grace should never be exchanged for wealth. Throughout their lives, the brother and sister occasionally reunited, though Andrew's ability to travel long distances in short periods puzzled those who witnessed it. He never explained how he managed such journeys. In his final days, Andrew lay dying when Bridg appeared at his side. Some witnesses believed she had arrived through supernatural means. After his death, she disappeared once again, leaving behind only rumours about where she might have gone. Another influential religious figure was Cel, a respected abbot who travelled widely through Ireland. Known for his simple clothing and disciplined lifestyle, he represented the ideal expected of many followers of the White God. Cel devoted himself to healing both physical illness and spiritual suffering. His journeys brought him into conflict with those who still practiced older beliefs connected to the supernatural world. He regarded such traditions as dangerous deceptions and dedicated much of his life to confronting them. As a travelling exorcist and preacher, he attempted to drive away what he believed were malevolent forces influencing the people. One morning, after his usual prayers at sunrise, he experienced a disturbing vision. In that vision, enormous wolves devoured the sun and moon, while an endless winter consumed the land. The rivers of Ireland appeared red with blood. Shaken by the experience, Cel believed the vision to be a warning. Determined to understand its meaning, he set out on a long journey to seek guidance from the highest authorities of his faith. Meanwhile, political power in Ireland continued to shift between rival kings. One of the most unpredictable rulers of the period was Celtic mac Buadachan, King of Munster. Celtic built his power through opportunistic alliances. At different times he cooperated with Norse warriors or with Gaelic rivals, depending on which partnership offered greater advantage. His appearance reflected both traditions. He wore long braided hair and beard, heavy furs over armour, and carried both a Celtic sword and a weapon of Norse design. The strange winter that spread across the Isles disrupted his usual methods. Raiding had long been the simplest way to provide wealth and food for his followers. But frozen conditions made such campaigns difficult. Desperate to secure supplies, Celtic devised a ruthless plan. Inviting his former Norse allies of Waterford to negotiate an alliance, he allowed them to relax within the city before launching a surprise attack. During the night, his men eliminated the guards and opened the gates for a larger force waiting outside. The city was quickly looted, providing temporary relief for the starving population of Munster. Not long afterward, Celtic received an invitation from another powerful ruler seeking to unite Celtic forces against their enemies. The possibility of returning to open warfare appealed to him immediately. Another major figure in the spread of Christianity across the northern lands was Columba. Born into a powerful Gaelic family in Ireland, he grew up during a time when traditional pagan beliefs still coexisted with the new religion. A battle involving members of his family deeply influenced his future path. Too young to fight, Columba prayed publicly for victory. When his relatives prevailed, he interpreted the outcome as a sign that he should devote his life to missionary work. Leaving Ireland behind, he travelled north to the islands off the coast of Alba. There, he founded a monastery on the island of Iona, which soon became a major centre for religious life. Life there was harsh. Winters were cold and resources were limited. The monks often gathered around a single fire, hoping the small supply of fuel would last until morning. Despite these hardships, Columba continued to travel widely, preaching and establishing new communities. Stories about his miracles spread quickly, including one incident in which a locked gate opened when he made the sign of the cross. Columba later predicted the moment of his own death. On the night it arrived, he walked calmly into his church, attended a final service, and passed away before the altar surrounded by his companions. During the same period, the Kingdom of Alba struggled to maintain unity under the rule of Constantine II. Constantine followed the teachings of the White God, but also understood the cultural traditions of the Celtic people. His rule attempted to balance these influences, creating a hybrid system that combined older customs with new religious structures. The rise of Viking powers and expanding Anglo-Saxon kingdoms placed increasing pressure on his territory. Some regions within Alba even began to break away, forming smaller independent realms. Though allied by religion with neighbouring rulers, Constantine remained cautious. The ambitions of powerful kings threatened the fragile stability of his kingdom. Amid these turbulent years, he worked constantly to strengthen defences and hold together the alliances that kept Alba from collapse. Another widely revered figure in northern Britain was Cuthbert, a monk whose life was marked by visions, miracles, and profound devotion. As a young man, he desired to join religious life, but first served as a soldier during conflicts between rival kingdoms. After the wars ended, he finally entered a monastery, where his spiritual dedication quickly became evident. Cuthbert often became overwhelmed with emotion during worship, sometimes moved to tears while performing sacred rites. These displays of sincerity deeply affected those who witnessed them. He spent much of his time travelling through rural villages, encouraging people to abandon practices he considered sinful. During a devastating plague, many turned to old rituals for protection. But Cuthbert continued preaching and praying until the epidemic finally subsided. Eventually, he withdrew to a remote island where he built a small stone enclosure and lived in near isolation. According to later stories, he drove away hostile spirits believed to inhabit the island. Despite his desire for solitude, he was eventually chosen as bishop by unanimous decision at a major religious council. Only after repeated requests from clergy and ordinary people did he accept the position. As bishop, he influenced the behaviour of kings and nobles, encouraging more compassionate rule. His warnings to rulers sometimes carried prophetic weight. When a king ignored one such warning and launched a destructive campaign, he later died in battle exactly as Cuthbert had predicted. Near the end of his life, Cuthbert returned to his island hermitage after receiving a vision of his approaching death. After his passing, many extraordinary events were reported at his tomb, including stories that his body remained preserved long after burial. His remains later became the focus of pilgrimage and devotion, with believers claiming that contact with his relics could bring healing and protection during difficult times. The collapse did not arrive with a single battle. It came like a season that refused to end, a dimming of the world that turned old rivalries into desperate arithmetic. In the heart of Ireland, Don Shud Don MacFlain was once treated as a warning rather than a leader. Twice he challenged his father for power and failed, and when succession was settled, the highest crowns went elsewhere, split between family ties and political convenience. He carried himself like a man playing at kingship, draped in flashy treasures that looked more like trophies than symbols of duty. And he was spoken of as someone unmade for war, uncertain in mind and brittle in resolve. Then, the year 919 changed the shape of his life. Foreigners met the Irish in open fighting, and the men who stood between Donchad and the throne fell where they fought. His brother and his brother-in-law died, and with them went their heirs. What had been contested became suddenly inevitable. Donchad stepped into the space death created, and he did not gamble with chance twice. He moved quickly, not with charm but with finality. A younger brother was blinded to remove him from ambition. In the years that followed, the last remaining brother and a nephew were killed as well. The realm gained a high king and learned the cost of a high king who intended to stay. Yet even a ruler who clears the board still needs pieces. The most important figure at Donchad's side is also the one most likely to oppose him. Muirchertash MacNeill, a man feared and admired in equal measure, celebrated for both kingship and hard fighting. Their bond was sealed through marriage, a political knot tied to keep steel from meeting steel. It did not create trust, it created boundaries, and when the long twilight spread across the land, bringing hunger, cold, and unrest, those boundaries were tested by opportunity. A message arrived from the north, carried by a druid sent from the king of Éire. The claim was simple and dangerous. There was a way to stop the darkness and reclaim what had been taken. Donchad prepared his court to ride at once, because in an age where kingdoms starve, the first to hear a plan is often the first to profit from it. He meant to stand beside Muirchertach in any reconquest, and he meant to take his portion of whatever survived the storm. Across the sea and along the borderlands, other rulers tightened their grip on what remained. In Cumbria, the land had always resisted neat control. Vikings and Anglo-Saxons both struggled to rule it for long, and isolation hardened it into a stubborn frontier. When the cold deepened, the people rallied around a king. They chose for survival rather than ceremony. Dunmail rose from hardship, a tall, gaunt figure marked by scars that were not only wounds, but memories. He kept his weapons close even in private, sleeping as though betrayal were a nightly visitor. His rule was built on caution. He used the region's harsh terrain as a shield and gathered men who technically owed loyalty elsewhere. Under a revived name, Reged, Cumbria declared itself independent. Forts were repaired, hunting and fishing were organised, and the kingdom grew stronger by refusing to reach too far. Some lords chafed at restraint and begged for expansion, but Dunmail treated ambition like fire, useful only when controlled. In Leinster, Foilan MacMuiredaach played a different game. Newly crowned and smaller in stature than the warlike ideal his peers admired, he won respect through planning rather than intimidation. He offered diplomacy where others offered raids, proposing alignment with stronger neighbours, Éire and Mide. And he did it with such precision that even proud courts listened. Behind the public calm lay a risk that could destroy him. He sheltered a druid while presenting himself as loyal to the White God's church, trading secrecy for grain that kept his people alive. He understood the bargain would be exposed and prepared for the consequences, ready to purge dissent and keep the realm intact by force if necessary. He had already proven he could respond to threats without hesitation. When a white-cloaked druidess tried to influence him, she found a blade at her throat and a ruler who did not blink. She offered him truth instead of fear. If he wanted his alliances to hold, he needed to ride to Éire immediately. A message from Muirchertach arrived the same day, and Phelan chose momentum over caution, gathering loyal warriors and accepting that the druidess would travel with them. In an age shifting underfoot, he intended to steer the change, not be crushed by it. Far to the south, power wore a crucifix and spoke with certainty. Flea Bertash Mac Inmainin ruled southern Munster as both abbot and king, his authority wrapped in religious conviction. Wealth and hard living made him broad and heavy, and the contradiction between austerity and abundance fed whispers in every hall. He saw the dying world as a test set by the White God, a challenge to rise above physical need, and he insisted his leadership was proof of divine purpose. When rumours spread that Druids were uniting and old faith was returning, he reacted with fury, demanding penance and blood. One name surfaced again and again in those rumours: Muircheartaigh, MacNeil. The abbot struggled to reconcile it. How could a celebrated champion of the Gaels turn away from the one true light and stand with those he labelled devils? An invitation to Muircheartaigh's feast became, in his mind, both a chance for conversion and a trap for extermination. He planned to speak of salvation with one hand and reach for a knife with the other. In Wessex, resistance took the form of stubborn dignity. Frithestan, abbot of Winchester, once lived in a world where rank and duty felt stable. Then Edward the Elder died, an heir died, and Aethelstan took the throne amid bitterness and accusations. Frithestan refused to attend the coronation, a public insult disguised as conscience. He continued his work because survival demanded it, but he did not surrender symbols of loyalty to the old order. Gifts given by a former queen remained on his shoulders as silent defiance. Rumours claimed he would be found dead, or that he would commit murder himself, but the truth was colder. He was too principled for a blade in the dark, and his hatred had to be lived rather than acted upon. He prayed not for violence, but for time enough to witness the end of the reign he despised. In Cymru, the struggle was framed as law and conquest at once. Hywel Dda carried ink and steel with equal confidence. He rose alongside a brother, submitted briefly to a stronger king to gain protection and influence, then ruled alone when death stripped away partnership. He carved a new kingdom, Deheubarth, and became the most influential of the Welsh rulers through expansion that looked like destiny. His greatest legacy, however, was not conquest, but structure. He had traditional law written down and codified, claiming that clear rules could reduce vengeance and limit brutality. The code carried his name, and his reputation followed it. He wore both an ancient torque and a cross, blending identity with faith, and even travelled on pilgrimage despite seas crawling with raiders. Returning alive made him a symbol of fortune and determination. He aligned himself with Aethelstan, promising cooperation against northern enemies, while quietly gaining leverage within Cymru. Not all Welsh kings accepted subordination as fate. Idwal Foel of Gwynedd served Aethelstan outwardly, fought beside him when required, and still watched for the first crack in southern strength. His appearance matched his life. Battle scars, a long braided beard, a subdued talk that suggested pride kept under control rather than abandoned. He prepared his sons for the moment when obedience could be exchanged for revenge. He distrusted other Welsh rulers, believing they played their hands poorly, and he dismissed prophecies that promised a saviour rising from the hinterlands. For Idwal, survival was not prophecy. It was timing. In Ireland's monastic heartlands, faith itself began to fracture under hunger and terror. Odran Uaheole was a scribe, lector, and bard at Clonmacnoise, a man born into privilege and trained for the church's highest arts. He wore fine vestments and gold, but illness hollowed him out until his face looked almost skeletal, his eyes wet and fever bright. People whispered that a light clung behind him, as if the white god marked him for purpose. The twilight punished that belief. Starvation spread, and the songs of devotion became desperate pleas. Raiders pressed in, death became routine, and certainty rotted into panic. Odrin's mind began to slip. He stopped leaving his cell. He fasted and prayed until the line between revelation and breakdown disappeared. When his holy book caught fire and he believed it spoke to him, the change became irreversible. He emerged thin, unwashed, smiling too widely, declaring that the white god demanded a crusade. In a world losing structure, even sanctity could become a weapon. Further north in Britain, the kingdom of Strathclyde clung to identity through defiance. Owain ap Dyfnwal ruled a people who saw themselves as heirs of a stubborn legacy, survivors who refused to accept permanent defeat. His clothing favoured dark colours, meant for escape and ambush, rather than ceremony. He carried a great sword and wore heavy armour, and a torque marked him as a leader who did not intend to kneel. His realm stood squeezed between threats: Alba to the north, Vikings within reach, and Ethelstan's growing power to the south. Strathclyde needed allies, but pride did not always allow easy bargains. Still, Owain's people believed in one rule above all others: they would rise again as many times as required. Even the dead shaped the living. Padraig, remembered as the Apostle of Ireland, remained a contested symbol. He had been taken by pirates, enslaved, then escaped, only to return later as a cleric intent on changing the land that had broken him. Stories of visions, miracles, and conversions spread alongside darker songs that remembered him as a relentless enemy of Druids. His mission weakened old structures of pagan authority and gave ambitious kings a new partner against the spiritual class that had long constrained them. He died after decades of preaching, but his legacy endured as a fault line, a source of unity for the church and a source of bitterness for those who remembered what was lost. From those fault lines rose organizations that treated the Twilight as both catastrophe and opportunity. At the heart of the Druidic resurgence stood a central network devoted to the spirit of the island and the goddess who embodied it. They spoke of repaying an ancient kindness, of calming storms, of the land itself as something living and endangered. Their aims were not merely religious. They sought leverage, relics, portals, allies in hidden realms, and enough power to redirect the future. Visions guided their leaders, and covens beneath them pursued different strategies, from bargaining with strange beings to carrying out surgical strikes against enemies of the old faith. Beneath the surface, another alliance formed among subterranean peoples and secret traders, held together by fear of an unbreakable fate. They bought what could not be openly owned and used what could not be openly admitted. In a collapsing world, secrecy became a form of armour. Not everyone hid. Some chose the road and the blade, reviving the idea of wandering heroes who fought not for a single crown, but for a code. These warbands lived on reputation, skill, and the belief that old legends still mattered. They ambushed invaders from forests, upheld strict rules of honour in their own way, and searched for relics tied to ancient champions, hoping that awakening a sleeping hero could unite the divided lands. Their leaders varied from disciplined tacticians to ruthless aristocrats who ruled by fear and spectacle, but all were shaped by the same pressure. The Twilight rewarded decisive violence and punished hesitation. In the shadows, cults grew that were less interested in saving the world than punishing it. One secret order served a dark god and turned devotion into addiction, creating undead servants bound to rage and command. They hid among common folk, stole sacred objects, killed according to visions, and spread curses designed to fracture communities. Their leaders were remembered as monsters even by the violent standards of the age, celebrated by followers not for mercy, but for efficiency. Crime itself became organised religion, a sprawling underworld network of thieves, fences, raiders, and killers operated as an ecosystem of survival, trading secrets as currency and treating betrayal as an expectation rather than an exception. Their patron figure offered clear bargains, power in exchange for service, boons in exchange for tithes, punishment in exchange for failure. He built alliances across factions, not out of loyalty, but out of profit and shared hatred of anything that disrupted the natural cycle of life and death. His agents moved through hidden routes and strange doorways, appearing where they were least expected, supported by inhuman enforcers, shaped by hunger, disease, and ancient malice. Even the church tried to answer the crisis with force, but unity proved elusive. A militant coalition was formed to defend the faithful, yet debates over leadership and purpose paralyzed it. Some demanded holy war against pagans. Others insisted on protection and restraint. While councils argued, mobs demanded miracles, and rumours spread of sabotage from within. One powerful abbot took matters into his own hands, offering fealty to a foreign king in exchange for food and military support, believing that betrayal was acceptable if it ensured the church endured. In the twilight, morality did not vanish. It was descended in screaming waves, accompanied by wild music, curses, and a hunger for destruction. Their leaders were not generals in the human sense, but dominant predators whose authority came from terror, ferocity, and the ability to pull others into the same frenzy. Some were shapeshifters whose presence silenced the world itself. Some were goblin warlords who ruled by mutilation and intoxication. Some commanded bright riders who charged like the end of history made visible, then sang mourning songs while the ground still smoked behind them. Among them drifted a spectral embodiment of starvation, strengthened by every empty village and every desperate meal, turning human suffering into fuel for an expanding host. Across the Celtic lands, survival requires more than strength. Understanding the customs of the people who inhabit these islands can be as dangerous as facing the wilderness itself. Society is shaped by traditions that reach back centuries, and those traditions influence every alliance, oath, and conflict. Two great systems of belief compete for the loyalty of the population. One follows the ancient traditions preserved by Druids and mystics. The other worships the white god, whose teachings spread across the islands generations ago. Many people openly follow one faith or the other. Others quietly respect both, offering prayers in church while still leaving gifts in places said to belong to the unseen folk. Beyond human struggles, strange beings move through forests, hills, and coastlines, loyal only to their own mysterious rules. To understand these lands, one must begin with the island known as Éire. Éire lies to the west of the other Celtic territories, a rugged island wrapped in mist and legend. Its history has been shaped by constant waves of newcomers. Traders arrived from distant shores. Raiders followed them. Over time, settlers established themselves among the native people, leaving a culture formed from conflict as much as cooperation. Because Éire sits surrounded by sea, ships can reach its shores easily. That advantage allows commerce to flourish, but it also leaves the island exposed to invasion. Generations of conflict have left a mark not only on its people, but on the land itself. Stories of past invasions are remembered with remarkable clarity. These tales are retold constantly, sharpened through time so that the memory of earlier conquests never fades. The Gaelic people developed a strong seafaring tradition in response to this history. Their warriors became skilled fighters, accustomed to defending their homeland from outsiders. When Viking forces first arrived, they encountered opponents whose ferocity rivaled their own. Many believe that if the kingdoms of Éire had united against those invasions, the island might never have fallen under foreign control in any region. Ironically, the first stories of the White God reached Éire through the Gaels themselves. Their raids and slave-taking expeditions brought captives from foreign lands, including a missionary who would later return as a preacher. His teachings spread steadily across the island and introduced a new spiritual order that challenged older beliefs. Over time, the people of Éire divided along many lines. Some embraced the new religion, others remained loyal to the older traditions preserved by Druids. Political authority fractured into numerous kingdoms and chiefdoms. Some rulers looked outward to alliances with neighbouring lands, while others focused entirely on their own territories. New waves of settlers continued to arrive, altering the cultural identity of the island with each generation. Geographically, Éire is dominated by low central plains surrounded by rugged coastal highlands. From the sea, the island appears almost like a fortress ringed by natural defences. Yet once an invading force secures a foothold, removing it becomes extremely difficult. Over centuries of conflict, the fertile land that once attracted raiders has become a contested resource. Communities now struggle over farmland, sacred ground, and ancient ritual sites. Legends claim that certain locations across the island do not fully belong to the ordinary world. Some places appear only during particular seasons, or under unusual conditions. Others can be reached only by those who know the right path through fog, forest, or sea. The population of Éire is predominantly Gaelic. Viking influence exists in a few coastal settlements, particularly in areas where raiders establish permanent bases. Even so, most regions remain largely independent. Political leadership often changes through alliances, rivalries, and agreements among nobles rather than strict inheritance. Rulers are sometimes chosen through negotiation or the support of powerful families, rather than simple bloodline. As a result, the political landscape is constantly shifting. Several kings claim the title of High King, the ruler who would unite all of Éire. Yet no single leader has successfully controlled the entire island for generations. Among the people, old customs continue quietly alongside newer beliefs. Even in areas where the followers of the White God claim success in converting the population, many rural communities still practice ancient traditions. Offerings may be left in hidden places said to belong to spirits of hill or forest. In some villages, the same household might attend church, while also honouring older rituals passed down through generations. The environment of Éire has grown harsher in recent times. Cold winds sweep across the island, and rain or snow often falls without warning. Travel through forests and valleys becomes difficult under heavy fog. Those who wander into the mist sometimes claim to have glimpsed things that do not belong to the ordinary world. Many believe the strange mists surrounding Éire connect the island to other realms. These fogs appear thicker here than anywhere else in the Celtic lands. According to some traditions, they form a boundary between the human world and other hidden places beyond it. Control of these mysterious forces has become a matter of great importance. Druids, ancient spirits, and powerful beings are all rumoured to seek influence over them. Across Éire stand several ancient ceremonial sites, tied to the earliest kingdoms of the island. These locations once served as places where rulers were crowned and alliances forged. Each holds deep symbolic significance, and control over them is believed to grant legitimacy to anyone claiming authority over the land. One of these places is known as Carrig Fadreig, a rocky stronghold associated with both ancient rituals and later religious traditions. In earlier centuries, it served as a sacred place where Druids practiced divination and ceremony. Later, kings transformed it into a centre of the new faith, building structures that reflected the growing power of the church. Even today, the site remains important to both traditions. Some see it as proof of divine miracles, while others believe it still holds traces of older magic beneath the stone. Another ceremonial location stands on a hill known as Dún Ailinne. This site once hosted the coronations of rulers in eastern Éire. Though its earthworks and stone formations remain visible, the place has long stood abandoned. The nearby lands have become desolate, leaving only scattered livestock grazing among the ruins. The absence of permanent inhabitants is unusual for a place that once held such importance. Farther north lies Emain Macha, a vast complex of earthworks that once served as a meeting place for leaders and spiritual authorities. Rather than functioning as a military fortress, the site was designed for ceremonial gatherings and symbolic displays of power. Fires lit here once signalled messages across distant regions. Those fires have not burned for many years. In the Western Territories stands the ancient stronghold of Creassa, long associated with legendary rulers. Beneath its surface lie caves and hidden chambers that connect to a network of underground passages. These tunnels have been used for centuries as secret routes and shelters. Stories claim that powerful spirits dwell within these depths, emerging only during particular times of the year. At the centre of the island rises the Hill of Uisneach, a place regarded as the heart of the Celtic world. Monuments and burial mounds cover the surrounding slopes. According to tradition, great ceremonial fires once lit here signalled the beginning of seasonal festivals throughout Éire. Even in difficult times, people continue to gather on the hill, believing the land itself protects those who remain there. Beyond the royal ceremonial sites, many other locations across Éire hold importance in the struggle for power and survival. Stone circles at Baig Mór form intricate patterns aligned with the movements of the sun and moon. Ancient tomb complexes at Brú na Bayin contain chambers that illuminate with sunlight during specific moments of the year. The ruins beneath the Cathedral of Kildare hint at structures far older than the building that now stands above them. At Tara, once the symbolic centre of kingship in Éire, strange reports have emerged of figures moving through ancient fortifications long abandoned. Some believe the boundary between life and death has weakened there, allowing the past to return in unsettling ways. Along the western coast rises Dún Aongasa, a fortress built on towering cliffs overlooking the sea. Its stone walls form massive rings of defence, making it one of the most formidable positions on the island. Nearby islands contain smaller fortifications, creating a network of strongholds that control the surrounding waters. Far to the north stands Griannan of Aileach, an ancient hill fort that has served as a royal seat for centuries. Though impressive in design, it lies far from many centres of power, forcing its rulers to travel frequently across the island to maintain influence. Other locations hold mysteries of their own. Knocknarea rises above the landscape with a great cairn at its summit, said to mark the resting place of a legendary queen. Noth contains passage tombs arranged with astronomical precision. At Clonmacnoise, a monastery once surrounded by a thriving settlement now stands unusually quiet, avoided by both religious and pagan factions for reasons few understand. Across these lands, spiritual conflict continues alongside political struggle. The followers of the White God spread their influence centuries ago, forcing the Druids and other keepers of ancient knowledge into the margins of society. For generations, the older traditions seemed destined to fade into memory. Then the world began to change. An age of darkness known as the Twilight spread across the northern lands. The sun and moon dimmed. Cold winds swept across fields and forests. Crops failed, and strange mists crept over the ground. Faced with these hardships, many people turned again to the ancient ways for guidance. Druids emerged from hiding, claiming that the crisis proved the old traditions had never truly disappeared. At the same time, others clung more strongly to the newer faith, believing the suffering was a test of devotion rather than a sign of forgotten gods returning. Meanwhile, Viking forces continued their campaigns across the seas. They encountered a land already divided by belief and politics. Instead of uniting against the invaders, rival kingdoms struggled against one another. This fragmentation allowed the newcomers to establish strongholds that might otherwise have been impossible. Amid this turmoil, a daring plan began to circulate among the Druids. According to their teachings, Éire lies closer than any other land to the mysterious realm known as the Otherworld. Long ago, powerful beings settled the island precisely because the boundary between worlds was thin there. Certain sacred sites were believed to serve as gateways connecting the human realm with places beyond it. These other realms include lands of eternal youth, radiant plains, and strange kingdoms hidden within swirling mists. Some are said to contain the spirits of heroes who died in battle. Others are ruled by beings who resemble the gods of ancient stories. Together, these realms form what is often called the Otherworld. Rather than a single location, it is described as a vast collection of domains existing alongside the ordinary world. Each realm follows its own laws of time, distance, and reality. Fire may burn differently there. Paths may shift without warning. A traveller might walk for hours only to return to the same place, or take a single step and cross vast distances. Within these realms live many different beings. Some appear welcoming, offering feasts and hospitality. Others are hostile or deceptive. Travellers who enter these lands rarely understand the rules governing them, and returning home is never guaranteed. Passage into the Otherworld occurs through unpredictable gateways. Some claim to have reached it by sailing across particular waters. Others describe caves, forests, or ancient burial mounds that open briefly into hidden paths. Fog and mist often appear before such journeys begin. Even when someone returns safely, time rarely behaves as expected. A short walk through the mist may span hundreds of miles. A traveller who believes only hours have passed may discover years have gone by. Between the realms lie the mists themselves, strange regions where distance and time lose meaning entirely. Creatures that inhabit these shifting spaces are rarely seen clearly and even more rarely understood. Since the Twilight began, these mists have spread beyond their usual boundaries. Across the Celtic lands, they now appear more frequently than ever before. In Éire, they are especially dense, covering hills and valleys day and night. Some believe this expansion is simply a side effect of the world's growing instability. Others suspect something far more deliberate is unfolding. According to the Druids, the mists may be the key to saving their people from the coming end of the age. If they can reclaim the sacred sites of Éire and restore the ancient rituals performed there, they believe it may be possible to shift the island itself toward the Otherworld. Their goal is a place known as Tír na Nog, a land of endless youth and abundance where winter never falls. Whether such a transformation is possible remains uncertain. But as the twilight deepens, and the mists grow thicker across the land, the struggle for control of Éire has become more than a battle for territory. It has become a battle for the future of an entire world. Not every court of the hidden world remains tied to a single place. Some drift across the lands and seas without permanent halls or borders. Among human societies, this kind of wandering is usually forced by war, hunger, or exile. Among the supernatural courts, it is often a deliberate choice. These roaming courts possess abilities that allow them to travel not simply across distance, but across the shifting boundaries between places and moments. Entire assemblies of spirits may vanish from one region and appear in another, as if carried by the wind through the folds of time itself. One of the most feared figures associated with such wandering hosts is Cleodina, a powerful banshee whose influence stretches across the Celtic lands. She serves as a leading figure within the forces commanded by the Morrigan. When the Morrigan rides out with the spectral host, known as the Sluag, Cleodina often governs the court that remains behind and organises the gathering of wandering spirits. During the long darkness of the twilight, the banshees under her command roam across valleys and coastlines. Their role is to guide the spirits of the newly dead. Some souls are delivered to the realm ruled by the god of the dead. Others are persuaded to join the ranks of the Morrigan's growing following. In this way, the wandering courts become collectors of the restless and the lost. Alongside these great roaming assemblies exist countless smaller courts scattered across the islands. Many occupy only a single hill, grove, or burial mound. Others gather within small pockets of wilderness, hidden from ordinary sight. In these places, minor rulers claim authority over a patch of forest, a stream, or a lonely valley. To the inhabitants of these tiny domains, the turmoil sweeping the wider world means very little. Wars between kingdoms and the deepening twilight are seen merely as another turning of the seasons. Above the Fae and their courts stand beings of far greater power. These are the gods themselves. In many stories, the boundary between god and spirit appears blurred. Yet, the difference is immense. A true god governs forces that shape reality itself. Each of them embodies some aspect of the natural or cosmic order. Through them, the physical world and the unseen realms remain connected. Unlike mortal rulers, or even the lords of the Fae courts, the gods rarely concern themselves with ordinary political struggles. Their awareness stretches across ages rather than years. The disputes of kings and tribes appear small when measured against the slow movement of centuries. Yet the arrival of the twilight has begun to draw their attention. Events unfolding across the Celtic lands threaten to reshape the balance that has existed for generations. Among these divine figures is Ériu, the spirit closely bound to the island that bears her name. Legends about her origins differ widely. Some say she is the island itself given consciousness through the devotion of its people. Others believe she emerged when the first soul died upon the land and merged with it forever. Whatever the truth may be, Ériu represents the living essence of the island. She delights in songs and poems praising the beauty of the land. Those who honour the hills, rivers, and bogs of the island often believe they feel her presence in return. In exchange for reverence, she grants the people the ability to live upon her soil. Crops grow, animals thrive, and even battles unfold across her fields, under her watchful presence. Yet she does not tolerate disrespect. Travellers who mock the land or its spirit sometimes vanish into marshes, or are found drowned along the shore. Stories tell of an ancient figure who once mocked the island upon his arrival. In response, the sea shattered his vessel against sharp stone. The man died upon those rocks and later became associated with the realm of the dead. Through such tales, the people learned that the land itself must be respected. Ériu cares deeply for the creatures and people who inhabit her territory. Hunters who wander too far sometimes find unexpected food or shelter when desperation sets in. Farmers speak of strange moments when the soil becomes unexpectedly fertile. To many, it seems that the island itself quietly aids those who treat it with care. Her relationships with other divine beings are complex. Many admire her, and several powerful races have long considered her a beloved ally. Yet her deepest bond is said to have been with a mysterious being from the sea. When waves strike the shore, some claim it is the echo of that ancient connection. When foreign settlers arrived long ago, they offered a song praising the island's beauty. The story says that the song moved Ériu so deeply that she allowed them to remain upon the land. With her favour, those settlers prospered and became the ancestors of the Gaelic people. Despite her affection for those who live upon her soil, Ériu does not intervene directly in the conflicts fought across her surface. Battles between gods, spirits, and mortals are allowed to unfold without interference. The island bears witness to each clash, and legends say Ériu mourns every life lost, no matter which side they served. The coming of the twilight has wounded her deeply. The unnatural cold spreading across the north slowly drains the vitality of the land itself. Fields struggle to grow. Rivers freeze. Even the forests begin to wither. For a time, Ériu fought against this decay, pushing what strength she could into the soil to sustain the people who depended on it. Eventually, the effort exhausted her. As the darkness deepened, she withdrew into a deep slumber, conserving what life remained within her. Before that sleep overtook her, she sent a final message across the ocean to the one being she believed might help her endure. The cry was felt by other divine powers as well, drawing their attention back toward the world they had long watched from afar. Even in her dormant state, the island spirit senses the gathering storms of war. The bloodshed to come will reshape the lands and the people who inhabit them. The old order may never fully return. Among the divine beings who continue to influence events is Éire, a powerful figure associated with sunlight, sovereignty, and the vitality of summer. She rules one of the most respected courts of the unseen world. Those who receive her favour describe her as generous and protective. Those who betray her discover quickly that her anger is just as formidable. Her story is often remembered as one of resilience. In ancient times, a king wronged her in a brutal act. Rather than surrender to despair, she retaliated with cunning. By injuring the king in a way that disqualified him from ruling, she ensured justice without open war. The tale became a symbol of clever resistance against tyranny. As darkness spreads across the land during the twilight, people increasingly seek her blessings. In an age of failing harvests and long winters, a goddess associated with warmth and growth becomes more valuable than ever. Another renowned figure is Aongus, celebrated for his extraordinary beauty and unmatched skill in many arts. He is remembered both as a warrior and a poet. Stories portray him as a master of many disciplines, rather than a single craft. This versatility allowed him to earn respect among the ancient clans of the divine. In youth, he acquired a magnificent dwelling through clever wordplay, demonstrating a talent for subtle strategy. Rather than conquering through force, he often relied on wit and persuasion. Aongus also became known as a protector of the vulnerable. Tales describe him rescuing captives or intervening when powerful figures abused their authority. Although he possessed weapons of immense power, he preferred to use them sparingly. His magical abilities extended even to the boundary between life and death. In certain stories, he temporarily restored fallen companions to life, so that unfinished words could be spoken. Such acts reinforced his reputation as a guardian of memory and loyalty. His legendary love story is equally famous. After glimpsing a mysterious woman in a dream, he searched tirelessly across the lands until he finally found her among a group of enchanted maidens. When the moment arrived, both transformed into swans and departed together. Their voices were said to carry a song so beautiful that listeners could fall asleep for days. Bridget stands among the most revered figures in the Celtic tradition. She embodies inspiration, healing, fertility, and the creative spark that drives poets and craftsmen alike. Many households once kept sacred fires in her honour, believing that the warmth of the hearth carried her blessing. Her legends often emphasise compassion and renewal. After the death of her son in battle, she created the first lament. a sorrowful song that became the origin of mourning traditions among the people. Through grief, she transformed pain into ritual and memory. A sacred flame associated with her once burned in a revered sanctuary. Even after new religious traditions arrived, the fire continued to hold symbolic importance. Some believe it must one day be restored to its former glory. Bayin represents the life-giving power of rivers. Her story begins with curiosity and ends in transformation. Seeking knowledge from a forbidden source, she challenged a sacred well believed to contain ancient wisdom. The waters burst forth in fury, destroying her mortal form and flooding the surrounding land. From that event, a great river was born. Though the transformation cost her life, the waters she unleashed became a source of nourishment and knowledge for generations. Her story serves both as a celebration of discovery and a warning about the dangers of reckless curiosity. The divine smith Creedon embodies the artistry of metalwork. His creations include intricate ornaments and objects of symbolic power. Many of the most beautiful relics attributed to the ancient gods are said to have passed through his forge. Another craftsman of legendary reputation is Goibnu, master of the forge and patron of hospitality. Weapons created by his hand are said to possess unmatched strength and durability. At the same time, he presides over feasts where guests are welcomed with endless food and drink. Luchtain completes the trio of divine artisans. As a master builder and carpenter, he shapes wood into vessels, halls, and sacred objects. Through careful craftsmanship, he transforms ordinary materials into items worthy of divine use. The figure known as the Dagda stands at the center of many traditions. Associated with wisdom, strength, agriculture, and magical knowledge, he is regarded as one of the most powerful leaders among the divine beings. In ancient stories, he served both as warrior and host, organizing great feasts that united allies. Danu, often described as the mother of the divine lineage, represents the cycles of nature and fate itself. Her influence extends across rivers and lands bearing echoes of her name. During the growing crisis of the Twilight, she attempted to slow the destruction spreading across the north. Through powerful magic, she created a fragile balance intended to delay the full force of catastrophe. Dian Sesht, known as a master of healing, occupies a more complex position. His skill in medicine and magical restoration saved many lives. Yet stories also portray him as ruthless when confronted with potential threats. In his quest to prevent disaster, he sometimes destroyed what he feared might become dangerous. Among heroic figures, Lu stands out as a champion of skill and leadership. His victories against monstrous enemies secured freedom for his people during an ancient war. Legends portray him as a master of many talents, rather than a specialist in one. Even after death, his influence continues from the other realms, where many believe he still guides chosen champions. Manannan Mac Lir governs the oceans and the shifting pathways between worlds. Once a mortal druid, he gained mastery over the mysterious mists that separate the ordinary world from hidden realms. Sailors regard him as a protector who can calm storms or raise them against enemies. He possesses numerous magical artifacts and is said to know the location of many others long lost. More importantly, he understands the hidden routes between worlds better than any other being. Because of this knowledge, travelers often seek his favor before venturing into dangerous waters. The Morrigan embodies war, fate, and prophecy. Often appearing in multiple forms, she observes battles from above and predicts the rise or fall of armies. Her influence spreads through warriors, mystics, and secret followers who act as her agents across the lands. Finally, the ancient king Nuada remains a symbol of just leadership. Though slain in a legendary battle, his legacy continues in the realms beyond death, where rulers seek his wisdom. In times of crisis, his counsel is believed to guide those responsible for protecting their people. Together, these figures represent the vast network of powers shaping the Celtic world. Their actions and rivalries unfold slowly across generations. As the twilight deepens and the boundary between worlds weakens, their influence grows stronger once again. The fate of the island and its people may ultimately depend on how these ancient forces choose to act in the darkness ahead.